All right. So again, my name is Patrice Armstead. I'm the founder of the August Wilson Consortium, and today we're celebrating the birth anniversary of August Wilson, and we have a whole host of artists, academics that's going to be with me today to celebrate August Wilson. But before we get started, I want to go ahead and introduce Brian Anthony Wilson. Was born and raised in Philadelphia. He is a professional theater, film, and TV actor. He had the honor and privilege of performing in 8 of August Wilson's 10-play American Century cycle. Plays include Fences 4 times and The Piano Lesson 2 times. The only two he hasn't done are Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and Radio Golf. He has been nominated for 2 Barrymore Awards, once for Gabriel and Fences at the Bushfire Theater, and the second time, 25 years later, for his portrayal of Sally Two Kings and Gem of the Ocean at the Art and Theater, for which he won the award for Outstanding Supporting Performance in a Play back in 2019. Wilson was blessed to be in Mr. Wilson's presence 3 times and actually had a brief but wonderful conversation with him. After Mr. Wilson came to see King Hedley II at Plays and Players Theater, a Philadelphia Theater Company production, August Wilson is Brian's favorite playwright. So thank you so much for being with me today, for being actually with the community. So this is
Well,
a
listen,
virtual community event. All right.
amen.
So I mean, is the floor is open to you, Brian?
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you virtually. Your hair looks fierce, girl.
Thank you.
Got it done, looking good. Yeah, listen, I'm happy to be here. I meant to get my I had to I couldn't get my August Wilson postage stamps from the place here when they first came out because the lines were like crazy. So I ordered them online and I got like three sheets of them. I already went through one sheet, but I
Okay.
meant to have them with me here. But it's so amazing to have a stamp for somebody that I actually met, and I didn't know him, but I was in his presence like, yeah, 3 maybe 4 times. But again, he didn't come to see King Hedley II in 2003 because of me. Linda Gravatt, who played my mother in King Hedley in Philadelphia. She was the understudy for Leslie Uggams when it was on Broadway. And so she came because she had a relationship with August. So she told us, she said, August may come to see it. And of course, I won't let you know because I would have went to the bathroom with myself had I known August was in the house. But it's weird. I'm a Pisces. I'm born in February, and I have like that Piscean sixth sense. And for some reason, I didn't know, but the first Sunday after we opened, I messed something up in the first act that I had never messed up. I mean, King Hedley has like, I don't know, 30, maybe 20, 30 monologues. Um, and so I messed something up, and I was like, "Damn!" So I said to myself, "I bet you August is here because I messed something up that I never did." And then, sure enough, after the matinee, Linda said, "Hey, got a surprise. August was here." I was like, "Damn!" It wasn't my best show. I certainly got a lot better at it. With August's work, I believe, as somebody who's done a bunch of them, it takes about 2 weeks before. I mean, depend. On Broadway, they give you, I don't know, 15, 20 previews. I mean, when you do stuff here in Philly, you might get, I mean, well, nowadays, who knows? But I've done shows where I got one preview and we opened. And that's just not enough for August. I mean, it just is so deep and so rich. His words, his material, the way he sets everything up. And of course, when you have the vision of somebody, brilliant like Walter Dallas or James Imes, my director from Gem of the Ocean, whose visions are so, they mesh so beautifully with August's words. And so it takes a while for it to get in your bones, even when you're doing it. When you've had a decent um, rehearsal period. I mean, I did Fences a few years back, 4 years ago almost, in Vermont, and I played Troy, which was my fourth time doing fences. I had played Gabriel, um, Lions, Bono, and then finally Troy. So I've done it 4 times. So I had a unique perspective of doing it. But anyway, luckily I knew the piece because we only had 2 weeks of rehearsal, one preview, and then we opened.
Mhm.
But luckily it was a beautiful cast, and we, even when 'cause it was a small budget, so we weren't scheduled that much, but we got together on our own. Like we went to the town library and brought library rather, excuse me, and practice our lines. We did stuff on our own. I mean, we had to. We only had 2 weeks for this monster Pulitzer Prize winning play, so it was one of my on my bucket list, and I was so happy to be able to portray him. And it was after Denzel had been on Broadway, which I saw their second preview, and it was eye opening because Denzel and Viola Davis are at the top of their game, and to see them not struggling, but to see them kind of vulnerable, like it was like, oh wow, they're like me, like us, are people who are not at their pinnacle, but we're actors, we're all artists, but it was like, wow, they're still finding stuff too. So I don't feel so bad when I'm in the second preview and I'm not say don't know what's going on, but don't have the full picture. But yeah, to do August's work is just well, it's a gift and it's an honor as a black man. And King Headley was one I really connected with, and had a call back for it in New York, and I know I think I beat out a few New York actors, which um is I mean I'm just saying, it's like I was surprised when I was cast because I was like, yeah, they're going to go with the New York actor for this, even though it was for Philadelphia Theater Company. But August's words just touched something in me, and at that point, I think I had done about 5 of his plays. But it just yeah. So anyway, that was a long roundabout story. Just saying, I wish I would have been in another week in when August saw the show because I could tell he wasn't he wasn't very impressed with my King Edley, but but I got a chance to ask him a couple of questions about the show, about my character, and it was just mind blowing to be able to talk to someone who I hold in the highest esteem, and also just to have that information while the play was still running, which I incorporated what he shared with me, and I mean, imagine being able to talk to Tennessee Williams about Streetcar Named Desire or something while he's still living, but it was just, I mean, mind blowing. And I was in his presence. I met him a couple times, and then the only Broadway, it was just eerie, I guess, not eerie, but quirky, that I saw Gem of the Ocean. I was out in LA doing something else, and I saw it in LA first with my friend Yvette Gagne, who originated Black Mary. She was freaking brilliant. But well, you should have her on one time because she knew August, and she was been in a bunch of his stuff. And when it came to Broadway, they kind of went with a name person as opposed to the person who originated it. So I don't know the whole story. That's her story to tell. But anyway, I saw Gem of the Ocean in LA while I was still before it came to the Broadway, and then I got a chance to see. That's the only Broadway opening I've ever been at. The opening of Gem of the Ocean, in New York on Broadway, because Al White, who was in and Al White, you've known from Airplane and a whole bunch of other stuff. He played Elmore in King Hedley at King Hedley the second at PTC, and he was invited to the Broadway opening. His wife couldn't go, so he invited me because he and I had did King Hedley together. So I'm sitting there at the Broadway opening of Gem of the Ocean. August Wilson is like a seat behind me, and of course he doesn't remember me, but I'm always sneaking to look back during the course of the show and seeing how he's reacting and stuff, which was just amazing. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But anyway, yeah. So I was in his presence a few times, and it just was it's like being in the presence of Mozart or or Prince, for our generation. But August was just, and he was just so, he wasn't full of himself. He was unassuming, but he was so brilliant, and just to have breathed the same air as him for a few times was, and to actually have a really brief conversation, but he gave you his full attention when you spoke with him. Because he was such a I mean, it's in a good way, a voyeur. I mean, a lot of the stuff he wrote, and I mean, but his poetry is unquestionable. But he used to sit and listen and write down uh, conversations. He'd be in a diner or wherever and writing on napkins and pieces of paper because that's how his inspiration hit him. And then, I mean, once he got the inspiration, who the hell could write like that but him? But yeah. So he was just so I don't know. He just was an icon. He was a presence otherworldly. Like I'm sure it would be if I ever had met Prince or Michael Jackson. But he was in touch with the divine. So just to be near him was just a treat,
Mm.
an honor.
So Brian, do you mind jumping into because I just want to say when I seen you in Gem of the Ocean at the Art, and it was incredible,
Well,
incredible,
thank you.
very moving. Um, and I just can you just talk about your just experience, playing Solly Two Kings and Gem of the Ocean, which I think is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful plays in the entire American century cycle. So, how was your experience playing Solly Two Kings?
I mean, it was awe inspiring and mind blowing, and A B C D E, all of the above. Is and I first want to give dap and respect to my brother, James Imes, who who I knew before he won his many Barrymores, and I had the pleasure of being in Superior Donuts with James Imes at the Arden when he won his first Barrymore for acting. But I want to give much respect and dap to James Imes because I was supposed to play. This was, I don't know, maybe 10 years before this, but I was cast to play Caesar in Gem of the Ocean at Bushfire Theater. But then I think I had a conflict with something at the Arden, ironically, and couldn't do it. So, but James saw something in me. He had me. I forget what other character I read for, but my callback was for Solly Two Kings, and I had seen this, in L.A. on Broadway and other, things with the late great. He just passed away, Anthony Chisholm,
Mm-hmm.
and he was phenomenal. And I've seen him do a bunch of other stuff like Fielding and Jitney, but James saw something in me that would relate to Solly Two Kings, and he was right on. I mean, it's happened many times. The first time I played Othello, Carmen Khan saw something in me. Walter Dallas, the late great Walter Dallas, um, Jr. He saw Thurgood in me, and James saw Solid Two Kings in me, which I didn't even think about for myself. But I love the character. I mean, because I mean, I'm very, naturally very silly, very warm, whatever. But but I love being able to portray characters who are, so much more than me. This man, you know, led slaves to freedom. I was recently in Virginia shooting an independent film, and I went down there on the train, and I was looking at all this greenery in this field. I was like, I would get lost with a GPS in Virginia. How the hell did slaves make it to freedom in the dark? No cell phone, no web, no nothing. So that kind of hit me too, and I really actually thought about Solid Two Kings, but it was such a gift, and James, God, he assembled such a wonderful cast. It's one of the best August Wilson casts I've ever been privileged to be a part of.
Mm.
And my cohort, my girl Zahara, who I go back to Bushfire times with, she played the hell, you know, out of oh Lord, I can't even can't think of the character now. But
Esther.
the yeah, Aunt Esther. Good Lord,
Mm.
she. I mean, and again, I've been in the trenches with Z and Bushfire and a few other plays, and I've seen her on stage. But she went to the ancestors with her portrayal, and I saw that the toll it would take on her at the end of the night. I mean, some nights I almost had to carry her off stage.
Mm.
I mean, she left part of her soul um on that stage at the Arden when we closed, and we should have ran for another 2 weeks. That was what a magical production.
Yes, it
I
was.
mean it was so bizarre. I'd never seen anything like it. I was a Barrymore judge for 4 years, but to keep hearing our names come up and then not hearing Zahara's name and not hearing Akeem's name. But listen, it's we didn't hear Brother Chadwick's name, and Anthony Hopkins won the Best Actor award. But I saw, you know, what she did every night and what all my castmates did, and it won so many awards, and I was so proud to be a part of that. But again, many props to James Imes for seeing, Solid Two Kings in me. And yeah, I mean, I love August's work and I love his words, his phrasing, the musicality of it. And Solid Two Kings was, that was a gift to me as an actor, as an artist. And I gave it everything I had. And to be, Akeem told me, he said, "Man, you gonna get nominated for Barrymore." I was like, "Get out of here, man." But he was right. I gotta give him props too. But yeah, it's August's words. It just touches something in me as a black man. It reaches to my soul. I can feel it, in me. And it's like it's not that it's not work. It's certainly a lot of work, especially when you got to get those monologues. But Solid Two Kings is supporting. It's not, I mean, I've played Boy Willie, which is like a monster, and King Hedley the Second, and which are certainly dialogue heavy. I mean, but there's everything in them too. But so but yeah, it just was it was a gift from above, and just to be a part of that ensemble and what James Imes, the people he surrounded himself with. I mean, it was just top notch from A to Z. From costumes to dramaturgy, from and the sound, Daniel Eisen. Oh my God! And the cast was just one of the best I've ever. I've been doing theater for longer than you've been born, girlfriend, since 1983 or four. So this was, in my top five easily. So,
And also that the part where it's the water and then the heads are going
oh
around,
God. Mm-hmm.
that was
Again, James Imes and his designers who came up with that, and I can't recall everybody's name right now.
mhm,
But yeah, that image is still. I have pictures of that with with the bus, and I know a couple people asked for the black figures that were
mhm.
used, and then just the water, the way the water was used, the water. I mean, oh
The
God,
sound
just
was incredible. Whoever did
yes,
the sound. I mean,
yes, our
the
sound.
entire cast, everything, like you said, the costumes, the sound, the lighting, everything was just remarkable.
It was, and again, hats off for where hat to James Imes, and also for the Arden for having the wisdom to produce it because it's one of uh it's one of August's best pieces, and I was so happy that that was my eighth August Wilson piece.
Mhm.
But I don't know how many times, probably 12 different productions. But like I said, I've done Fences 4 times and Piano Lesson twice, and there's something's happening now that I'll put on Facebook later. But I may be able to get a chance to do Jitney again.
Mhm.
Equity is working with like a small theater company. It's out of town, but I'll find out about that hopefully next week, and that would be great to do another production of August Wilson. But yeah, I need to do Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and also Radio Golf. That'll give me all 10. So whoever's
Mm.
listening and looking at this, please cast me in one of those two or both of them.
That would be awesome to say. As an
Yeah.
actor, you've done all 10.
Yeah, I know a couple people who have done all 10, and that's I'm so jealous. It's so amazing.
But you're close. You're almost there. So,
Yeah, I'm getting in there.
so Brian, as an actor and as an African American man,
Hmm.
just speak on the vernacular. Because when I'm reading August Wilson plays, sometimes I have to read it again. Like,
Oh my God. Yeah, it's like, and I don't mean to be some people say, well, he's better, but I'm like, he's to me, I call him the Black Shakespeare, because his words has that musicality and that the just the deep the depth, and and has, just like Shakespeare has, comedy and drama. I mean, everything is in there,
Mhm.
So yeah, I think of him as Shakespeare, and you do have to. That's why I'm saying, even when you're in the show, I think, to me, it takes a good 2 weeks before everything is in your bones, and you can do stuff where you can. It's like, oh, cool. Now I can actually listen and react because you have to be so on point when you're doing the show, just like, what's coming up, where, what am I saying, what am I doing, and you have to motivate all of those long monologues and what you're saying. So yeah, it's something else. But each show has a like a kind of theme musically that our director of fences that we did at People's Light, Camilla Forbes, who now heads the Apollo, such a brilliant black
Mhm.
female director, one of the best I've ever worked with too. So she focused on that musicality that's always a part of August's stuff. In this set that has that jazz kind of improvisational feel, but there is a very specific rhythm to his words and to his plays that some people get and some people don't. As far as directors and stuff are concerned, but brother Denzel, of course, gets it, and I would love even to be a background extra in his stuff, but I can't even get that right now, but maybe one day.
Yeah, hopefully. Um, also want to, and also want to mention for our viewers, for the Q&A portion, or any questions or comments, you can submit that into the Q&A, and then toward the end, I'll look at that, and we can, Brian can go and, answer some questions. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah. Um, Also, so Brian, I wanted to ask you, you said that, no, I want to go back to the vernacular, because I was, while you were talking about that, I was thinking, I had seen Felicia Rashad speak at, it was at the Tisch School of Drama. They had a women's in theater,
Oh wow,
and
yeah.
she had mentioned when she was at Howard University studying, how um, she, at that point, she was afraid that eventually in theater and schools, not only just HBCUs, but just in general, um, Black men and women who are in studying the theater, that they would have a hard time with doing a Wilson's play, because that the vernacular is not being taught. Like, it will be lost. They wouldn't, um, know how to grasp that, because that's
Mm.
not really in the schools, or not being taught. So she was stating. So I just wanted to know, how do you feel about that, or is that something for like younger actors? Are you seeing that, or like, what's
I
your
mean,
thoughts on that?
yeah, no, I've actually participated in a couple of things where like I can't think of the people's names right now. I'm sorry, I use up so much of my uh, uh short-term memory with scripts and auditions, but I did a couple of things where we did pieces from August Wilson for different. It was a thing at Penn, I think, I should know about this. I'm very sorry. I can't remember exactly which schools it were, but there were a couple of schools that had actually classes about August Wilson, and they would bring in professional actors to do these scenes with the students, and I did that on a couple of occasions. Oh God, Susanna, I can't think of her last name right now. But
Oh, Burger,
anyway, huh?
Susan Burger,
Yes,
Susan Burger.
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
And so we did scenes from different August Wilson pieces. But I think it's criminal that it's not, being done. It should be done. And there are certainly enough people who have, been in August's sphere who are still around that could help facilitate those. And it should be, required learning, in my estimation. Um, I think he's, in the top 5 American playwrights ever. So
Mhm.
um, he's amazing. It should be a no brainer, but I
Right.
don't dictate what colleges teach.
Exactly right. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's just like for people that's coming up under you, because Wilson's plays is going to be around forever, and we're going to need actors to be able, to fulfill those shoes to go in and be able, to speak the Black vernacular.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I certainly owe to him too, is because as an actor, there are so many different characters you can portray throughout your, because when I first started out, I did a trilogy at Bushfire Theater. We did Fences, in which I played Gabriel, and then Joe Turner's Come and Gone, in which I played Harold Loomis, and then uh, Piano Lesson, which I played Boy Willie. So I was of the age that I could do all 3 of those. One I might have been too young for, but the others I was a little too old for. But black don't crack or whatever. And I've been able to, play a series of characters from, their 30s to their, 60s or 70s. So, which I also, I mean, probably it's in the billions of the amount of money that black actor and actresses have been able to make portraying August Wilson characters and what it's done for their careers. I mean, some of the best theater, experiences I've had have been August Wilson plays. 5 out of the top 10. So it's just amazing what he hit, the gift he gave us, and is still giving us, and will, like you say, for generations to come.
Hmm.
Just remember being a student at Freedom Theater doing the monologue from Fences as Troy, and then finally, in 2017, when I'm actually older than what Troy is, he's supposed to be 54, and I was 55, I think, at the time or whatever. But to actually be able to do it after pretending to be a older black man in his 50s and a father, which at the time in Freedom Theater I wasn't, and then just so much life experience that enabled me to give everything I had to Troy, as opposed to when I was in my 20s or early 30s
Hmm.
pretending to be Troy. I
Right.
was Troy when I played him. you know
Hmm.
but that gift that keeps on giving, the gift of August Wilson, and his brilliance and his words and his heart, his soul is still part of his soul is in his writing. There's no question about that.
I agree. I know I read somewhere, Brian, you started acting at, was it 23?
Yes, I didn't take my first. I started. I used to sing with a band called Perfect Blend. Started out as a singer, and I took classes at Freedom Theater, and then as part of the curriculum as a singer, I still had to take an acting and a movement class. So I was like, wow, I like this acting thing. For the next semester, I signed up for the acting program, and I was in class for 2 weeks, and then got thrown into a play, and not because I was some prodigy or whatever, but they had fired 2 people. They needed a warm body, and I was taking classes there. So I was kind of in a play before I even saw a play, which was kind of bizarre. But I got on the job training, and thank God Johnny Hobbs Jr. was in the show. It was called On Flower Street, written by the brilliant and talented Millicent Sparks. And Johnny Hobbs Jr. was in it, as well as the late, great Tony Ralph Wilson. And they taught me, I mean, I learned so much just by watching them. And Johnny was still my mentor, who was actually in my first wedding, years ago in the 90s. But thank God I was there to learn from them, and the late great Johnny Allen Jr. directed it. So yeah, it that's how I started though. Yeah, 83. It's either 80. I think I was 83 when I first took my class, and 84 when I did the show. But when I, it's like, I mean, I'm not a heroin addict, but I imagine it's like, you know, um, the first time that I mean, it is addictive. That feeling you get from the live audience, the laughter, the response, the rapport you have, and it was addictive. And I got the bug when that happened. I think my first time, we had an audience, and it was like, what the hell is this? So yeah, I was hooked.
So well, let me go back a little bit because I meant to ask this early on. Through 2020 with the pandemic, the civil unrest, I mean, we all been through a lot. But as an artist, I mean, how did that impact you?
I mean, it impacted me. I mean, in ways I'm probably not even aware of. And my wife told me. I mean, because she's been around. We've been with each other like 20 years or more. That I was kind of lost, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And probably was drinking too much and being quiet or whatever. But even though I did have an opportunity to do some things, but it took a few months before that happened online or whatever, and that kind of brought back my artistic juices. And I was doing a few things, but yeah, and I was like, wow, I didn't even realize that. But of course, she sees me every day and knows me, so I was like, I wasn't even aware of that. But yeah, it was a big hit, and so I was about to go on. I was supposed to do uh the Bodyguard, the musical, like mid March, and like a week before we were supposed to leave, we got the word that it was canceled because I was like 4 months worth of work. I would have been in um Florida for 6 weeks, and then coming back to the Walnut Street Theater for like 2.5 months or something like that. So, but yeah, and that all that money plus all of those health weeks went out the window. So I lost, the money, and I lost my insurance at the end of the year because of that show getting canceled. I would have been cool for all of this year. But I mean, hey, it's that and worse has happened to many other artists, so we're all in the same boat that way. But yeah, I mean, it had a big impact on me, and thank God I did have unemployment for a while, but that ran out, and I just been hustling, doing things that I shouldn't be doing, that are not at my quote unquote rate, but I got bills to pay. I got a kid, who's in
Right.
school, and so I do things that are as I mean, and it's nice for her. I shouldn't say nice. She's entitled, not entitled. Lord, what's what I'm trying to say? It was something that Viola Davis said about paying her what she's worth, which
Right.
I'm fully on board with. Black women have been woefully underpaid, and it's like, but Viola, you can say that, and you are damn sure worth it. Um, you know, I'm doing projects now that I got paid more for over a decade ago, but I need to work. I need the insurance, so I do what I got to do.
Mhm.
But everybody can't say pay me what I'm worth, because they'll just say, you know what, you're not worth that much to me. I mean, it's tricky. Know your own self worth, but also know the market. I can't go and say what Viola Davis can say because I don't have, you know, several Academy Award nominations and wins and other things behind me, and I certainly don't have her level of talent. But you know, we do what we got to do to get by. And we're black artists, which is different. And I'm a black artist of a certain age, and I'm not even viewed as black. Sometimes I've lost opportunities because I'm not black enough. It's
Mhm.
like, well, we're gonna hire. I mean, I've heard this outside of the room, but not directly. But it's like, well, if we're gonna hire a black person, we want to make sure people know he's black. I mean, I did a couple commercials, like the only commercials I've ever done. They usually don't cast me for that, but for Pennsylvania Lottery. And my cousin saw this commercial I did and called my mom and said, "Oh, Bert, there's this white man look just like Brian." I'm like, really? You're my own family. You don't know I'm black. So it's like, that's a real thing sometimes. A lot of times you don't get
Mhm.
hired because you're too light. And it's like, I don't want people questioning something. I look like I'm mixed, but I'm not. Both my parents are black.
Mhm.
But it's the business. You got to
Right.
take it with the take the good with the bad.
But you've been resilient because you're still here. I'm speaking with you. You look
Amen.
great. So
No, thanks. I'm a little scruffy. I gotta start growing a beard for this. I had a mustache for a thing where I played a cop, and then I had to shave that off for something else, and now I got to grow a beard for this play I'm doing. So yeah,
so I'm
yeah,
going to the chat right now. I'm just
sure.
reading with Mr. Rawson wrote, which he'll be joining us a little bit later. He said actors who've completed the cycle that I'm sure
Oh
J. Dub Williams, Kim Sullivan, Waleed Jamal, Will Williams, Monte Russell, and more. Okay.
yeah, I know Kim, and I know.
I'm
I
definitely
mean,
familiar with
no, I met
Waleed
Monte
Jamal.
once.
Yeah, he's definitely Waleed Jamal.
Yeah, I don't know those other brothers, but I believe it.
Hmm.
Dang, I can't remember the brother's name right now, but I know because I reached out to him before, and he's done all 10 and plus. And I did Jitney with him uh, in 2006 with the late
Okay.
great Chuck Patterson. He played our Fielding. Dang, I can't remember his name, but the brother from Penumbra directed it. Who actually looks like my grandfather. The artistic director. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird
Okay.
seeing him in rehearsal every day. But my memory fails me now. But yeah, but thank you, uh, Mr. Rawson, rather.
Rawson, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'll look up the other brothers, but I do know two of them, and I do know, I think, two actors personally who have done all 10. And I mean, I knew Mr. Chisholm to speak to him. I'm pretty sure he did all 10 too. But yeah. So that's an impressive list, though. But
It
yeah, I know
definitely is.
Kim is funny. Kim when we did piano lesson at the Arden, uh, Kim came to see the show. If you don't like something, just say, "Hey, nice work." He pulls out a copy of a review that he did for playing the same character as me, and I was like, "Dude, seriously?" But that was funny to me. He a brilliant actor though, but it's like, hey man, whatever. But
So,
yeah, it's I know it's a handful of people who have done all 10. So
mhm.
much respect to them. I hope to be in that club one day.
And you will. I know you will.
We'll
Um,
see. We'll see.
I know you will. This is Kamika L.H. Williams
Oh,
Witherspoon. She says,
oh,
so,
Kamika, yeah,
Kamika, yes.
Dr. K,
Yes, from Temple.
yes.
So, what was the role in production that you were most proud of? And if you could go back and redo one role, what would that be?
Oh God, probably King Headley. Um, and most proud of, hmm, that's probably a toss between the fences we did in Woodstock, Vermont, and Gem of the Ocean, because I mean, in when I did, Troy and Fences in Woodstock, none of us had ever met. He auditioned people separately. So the first time we met was at the table read, and we had immediate chemistry, thank God. But we only had 2 weeks, and then we had a first preview. So but they were everybody was beautiful, wonderful, great actors, great artists, and great people. So and Gem of the Ocean, I knew a bunch of people, and I worked with a bunch of people, and certainly had done. That was my 12th show at the Arden, so that was a lot of stuff there were things that were lined up. But so it's a close tie between both of those. But hey, Dr. K,
All
kisses.
right. So our next one, we got 3 minutes.
Okay.
And Mr. Rawson says, no, Chiz didn't get to do all 10, but I love to know of others you know.
Yeah, it's oh, bro, man, it's a brother. We're friends on Facebook. And he actually lives in Minneapolis. He was reporting live from a bunch of that stuff when George Floyd was first, murdered. I can't think of his damn name. But he's one. Rawson, I'll get it to you after this because I can't think of his name right now. I don't want to take up
Mhm.
too much of Patrice's time.
Okay. But thank you so much, Brian, for joining me today. This
You're quite welcome.
conversation was definitely beneficial, and I learned a lot. I'm just looking forward to seeing you in more. I'll be glad when the theaters are like officially open and we can go out again and enjoy theater.
Me too.
I'm
Me
looking
too.
forward because
And
I
I
know
wanna.
you be in a lot of stuff outside of Philadelphia, but
Yeah,
I
unfortunately,
definitely look
I don't like
forward.
being
I'm sorry, what was
home.
that?
I say I don't like leaving home like that because of my family, but you got to go where the work is.
You
But
got to go where the work is,
I want
yeah.
to leave
But
you with something. Oh, love you, Millicent. I want to leave you with something real quick. It's just a little quick excerpt from Seven Guitars.
Okay.
All right, it's the character Canewell. You and Floyd get married. Always did believe in love. I felt like if you don't believe in love, you may as well not believe in nothing. But even love that ain't but halfway is still love, and that don't make it no less because it's only coming one way. If it was coming two ways, it'd still be the same amount of love. Just like say I loved you and you ain't love me back. I can still say I'm all filled up with love for Vera. I go walking down the street, people can see that. They may not know what to call it, but they can see something going on. Or maybe they see a man who look like he's satisfied with life, and that make him walk more better. Make him walk like he got $1 million in his pocket. If I loved you, and this time you love me back, I don't see where my love for you can get more bigger than it already was. Unless I walk like I got $2 million. Most people don't count it if they ain't love back. I count it just the same. Some women, they make their bed up so high, don't nobody know how to get to it. I know you ain't like that. You know how to make your bed up high, but turn your lamp down low. That's why Floyd don't want to lose you. I think you and Floyd ought to go on. See what you all can make of it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We at the consortium, we appreciate you. We love you. And we look forward to seeing you on the stage.
Peace and love. Stay safe. Get vaccinated.
Thank you. All right. So they
Good
say
luck with the rest
bravo.
of the day. I'm going to
You
tune in.
too. Okay.
My love to James.
All right. I will.
All right. Peace. Thanks for
Peace.
having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. So up next we have Melonnie Walker and Dr. Long should be joining us. I see Melonnie is here. And that was awesome with Brian Anthony Wilson. Hello, Melonnie.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Now I'm waiting for Khalid, Dr. Long, to join us.
Oh, that was so good. I was sitting here grinning as Brian was giving us
that was good.
I love that. I love that.
You look awesome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'll tell you, it's actually Melonnie. My name is
Melanie. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's a really unique spelling because my father's name, rest in heaven, was Lonnie.
Okay.
No, my mama was in love and she had to include his spelling name in my name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Melonnie. That's nice. I like that.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm trying to see. Okay, he's here. All right, one moment. And I'm not sure why I have to do this because y'all all should be able.
Can you all hear me?
Are you there, Dr. Long?
Can you all hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
So when I start my video, oh, there we go.
Okay, here you go. Hello, Dr. Long.
Hi. Hey, Melanie, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yes.
Yes, so
Always.
I want to go ahead and formally introduce you guys before we get started. So, one moment. Melonnie Walker is a graduate of the University of Missouri, Kansas City's Master of Arts program in theater history, where she focused her research on the legacy of August Wilson. She is the Director of Education and Community Outreach for KC Melting Pot Theater in Kansas City, Missouri, as well as their resident Dramaturg. She is also a member of the literary managers and dramaturgs of Americas and regional VP serving members in Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. Right. Dr. Khalid, in the middle name, is it Yaya?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Khalid Yaya Long is a recipient of the Excellence in Teaching Award, which he received in 2020, is an assistant professor of theater, coordinator of theater studies, and coordinator of dramaturgy for main stage productions. Dr. Long has published scholarly essays in Continuum, the Journal of African Diaspora Drama, Theater and Performance, as well as the Routledge Companion to African American Theater and Performance. Dr. Long's forthcoming scholarship includes essays in theater design and technology, TDR, the Drama Review, and the edited collection, Critical Essays on the Politics of Oscar Hammerstein II, edited by Donald Gagnon. Dr. Long has also contributed essays to Black Mass, a long-established Black theater magazine. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here. And Melonnie, you want to start?
Sure. Well, first of all, just let me say thank you so much to you, Patrice, and the August Wilson Consortium for holding this space on Wilson's birthday and inviting me to share it. I'm honored to be included with all of these awesome panelists. I'm going on just about 5 years being a freelance production dramaturg, contracting with the theaters here in my city. And then I'm also recently, I've just made the transition to high school education. So I'm pretty geeked to be able to bring my love of the century cycle into the classroom and introduce the students and kind of reframe this idea of what was traditionally taught as the classics, to kind of reframe and re-envision that for my students. So I'm excited about that. But today I just wanted to share with you my experience being a dramaturg of the American century cycle. One thing that I think is really interesting is how we've seen this shift in the last several years for theaters who are now just kind of suddenly interested in having more equitable and inclusive programming, and their efforts to hire more diverse artists and creative teams and everything. And I keep seeing this term, anti-racist theater, seems to be the trending term now. And these efforts to amplify Black voices. And I just kind of feel like, well, I really definitely feel like August Wilson had been doing this important labor decades, right, before we could throw a hashtag on it. So August Wilson's American Century Cycle is a powerful testament and celebration of the Black experience in America. And that's the part that I really want people to remember. That's the part that I consider myself committed to making sure that I share with my students, is to remember the celebration of it, right? And in that celebration is this shout. It's an exclamation, this joyful outcry that we are here, we've been here. So in Wilson's work, he clearly embraced the history of African Americans in this country, but he also honored the presence of our African heritage and the influence that it has on our culture today. And so honestly, that approach to kind of reaching back into the history of African American culture is a dramaturg's dream, a researcher dramaturg's dream. So as a dramaturg and a theater practitioner and a student, because I do consider myself a student of Wilson's work, my focus has been on examining how Wilson often returned to African rituals for the enlightenment and the elevation of his characters. So here at my home theater in Kansas City, which is KC Melting Pot Theater, we opened our 2019-2020 season with King Hedley II. So that was our most recent production of an American Century Cycle work. And as the production dramaturg, my job was to find the connections and the meanings between the text and the rituals that were present in the script. And I'll just share with you, for anyone who isn't aware of what a dramaturg does, our purpose is to find those cultural context, the historical context, whatever context and connections is needed for the cast and crew to be able to give their most authentic performance. So that's what a dramaturg does. We serve the production and the cast and crew in that way. So like going back to our production of King Hedley II, if you are familiar with that play, you know that this is the 1980s play where we are introduced to King Hedley II, who is the son of Ruby from Seven Guitars, which is the excerpt that Brian was just performing. So we're introduced to him, who is the son of Ruby, but we not only do we get reacquainted with Ruby and Canewell, who in King Hedley II, his name is Stool Pigeon, but this is also the play where we lose the wisdom and the glory and the light of Aunt Esther. In this play, she dies at 366 years old. Now go do the research on that magic. So Stool Pigeon in the play, he's making it his purpose and his obligation to make atonement and redemption for the community. And so he's using blood sacrifices in the production or in the script. So I was able to share with the cast and crew all of the research and the information that I could find about the West African traditions of blood offerings. So as a production team, we had lots of really great conversation about the implications of those blood offerings and sacrifices, and this idea of bloodletting being a gateway, this kind of gateway to salvation and redemption. And what happens in the very next play in the cycle? Black Mary comes home to 1839 Wiley Avenue, and the spirit of Aunt Esther is resurrected. So those are just some of the really wonderful discoveries that I get to make as a production dramaturg for August Wilson's American Century Cycle. And making those connections is just exciting for me. Like, I don't even think that's the best word, but I really just eat that stuff up. I really wish more theaters would employ the use and the skills of production dramaturgs, especially with the American Century Cycle, because there are just certain nuances and intricate details about Black life and Black experiences that are just honestly lost on some white directors. I'll share some quick stories with you before we hand it off to Dr. Long, but I can remember that I was at a conference that the August Wilson Society was hosting, and our guest speaker was Delroy Lindo. And you know, he's famous for his performance as Harold Loomis in Joe Turner's Come and Gone. So, you know, the play was originally directed by Lloyd Richards and was well received to this great acclaim, and even had some Tony nominations and everything. Well, Mr. Lindo had shared a story with us about how when the play was produced, I think he said at the Lincoln Center, but it was a completely different creative team, and it was a white director, and it just had a different feel, honestly. And some parts he was saying just did not feel authentic. And he said that there was this one scene where Selig comes into Bertha's kitchen and walks over to her stove and lifts the lid off of the pot and takes her stirring spoon that she's using, her cooking spoon, and tastes the contents of what's in the pot. And he said the people audibly gasped in the audience. And, folk were just commenting and talking back, how we do, no, he didn't. And it ended up being, just a moment that had to be talked about, because I just feel like a dramaturg who knows and lives this culture would have been able to tell the director, we don't do that. We don't do that. So, and then another story, we had a production of Gem of the Ocean here in my city. And again, the creative team was an all-white creative team and a white director. And there was a scene where Citizen is in the kitchen, and the director directs him to sit on the kitchen table, like to prop his hip up on the kitchen table while he was talking. And the actor that played that role told me that one night in the audience, this older lady in the audience literally broke the fourth wall and just hissed to him, "Get off that table." And it ended up kind of being a funny, lighthearted moment. But again, a dramaturg who knows and lives this culture would have been able to tell the director that in no way, shape, or form would Aunt Esther have tolerated somebody sitting on her kitchen table. So anyway, those are just a couple of examples of how valuable a research dramaturg can be to any production of August Wilson's American Century Cycle. So I'm just thrilled and honored that I get to do this work. So that's all I had to share.
Thank you. Dr. Long?
Awesome. So I wrote something because I have to write something. I'll be all over the place. So I'm going to read a short little thing, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So let's start with a scenario. The year is 2016. It is Christmas morning. My grandmother has suggested a few days prior, let's go to the movies. I haven't been to the movies in years, and I really want to see this film. I'm home in Philadelphia, visiting as I'm on winter break for my graduate studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. We rise early, we dress, and we get into the car and head down to the movie theater in the heart of University City. Yes, a parking space right out front. Although I wasn't too surprised, for it's Christmas morning and most people are opening gifts with their families. I get my popcorn. My grandmother gets a soft pretzel with her coffee. We grabbed it from Dunkin' Donuts on the way. Where do you want to sit? I ask. As we're the only two other people in the theater, we sit in the very center. My grandmother told stories about how she and my grandfather would often go to the movies during the early part of their courtship. She talked about how at one time you could pay 5 to 10 cents and see several movies throughout the day. And of course, we're talking about the 1940s. The lights dim in the theater, a sign that ushers in hushed tones, and the silencing of cell phones. The previews are over and the film starts. It's a blank screen, and we all hear a familiar voice. It's the voice of Stephen McKinley Henderson. "Troy, you ought to stop that line." And I think to myself and reference a proverbial phrase, August Wilson is about to blow up once again. I look over to my grandmother. I quickly grab my phone. I snap a picture of her, post it to my Facebook page, to which my mentor, Dr. Paul Bryan Jackson, quickly sent a message telling me to get off the phone and enjoy the film. I oblige, I sit back, and I enjoy the film adaptation of August Wilson's Fences. It was a special day. I felt good. I felt like I had accomplished something. I felt as though I had given my grandmother one of the greatest gifts one could receive: to see Blackness in all of its beauty, truth, and vulnerability on the big screen. My grandmother is not an overly emotional person, but I have learned to pick up on the moments where something has touched her deeply. When she is affected by something, she talks about it to everyone and often. To this day, she still speaks about our morning at the movies on Christmas Day in 2016. My grandmother and I entered the film differently. I'm trained in theater and performance studies, English literature, and Black studies. Admittedly, it is hard to take off the scholar dramaturg teacher hat, but for her a moment to stroll down memory lane and think back on her experiences as a little girl in Milledgeville, Georgia, who traveled the dusty roads in the 1930s during the Great Migration to end up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, although her parents' original destination was Detroit, Michigan. The film gave my grandmother the opportunity to think back on her time, similar to August Wilson's, in the Nation of Islam during the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, where she and my grandfather were inspired by the movement's call for Black solidarity and entrepreneurial endeavors, which would allow them to open and operate one of the oldest Black-owned dry cleaners in Philadelphia. My grandmother remarked about how Troy and Rose reminded her of the relationship between she and my grandfather, particularly in the sense that Black people are so resilient, resourceful, and loving even in the midst of what may feel like everlasting turmoil. And in many ways, I think my grandmother connected with Rose Maxon in ways I will never experience, nor will I understand. Seeing Fences on its opening in 2016 gave my grandmother the opportunity to see through her glistening eye, to say through her glistening eyes, fighting to hold back tears, as she would often say, I love Black art, Black films, Black plays. I love Black people. Whenever I mention August Wilson to my grandmother, she always recalled the story of her aunt and cousins in Pittsburgh being proud of some Black playwright from their community when he became a Broadway success in the 1980s. Repeating this story often, my grandmother says, my aunt and cousins always talk about August Wilson being from their area. And now look here, you studying his plays and teaching them. Her comment is typically followed up with her making note that the funeral where her aunt's memorial took place in the early 1990s was located on Wiley Avenue in Pittsburgh. These moments are the connective tissues for Black folks that link us to a forever binding history. The film adaptation of Fences was a proud moment for us all, especially for the Wilson Warriors. And to know that 9 more films would be coming down the pipeline, it gave us something to look forward to. August Wilson, the playwright, the historian, the preserver of culture, and as New York Times theater critic Charles Isherwood once called him, theater's poet of Black America, would once again gift to us 100 years of African American history. But this time it would take place on the big screen, thus giving a greater audience access to, or rather I should say, an entryway into the culture and history of Black America. Undeniably, August Wilson was fascinated with the history of Black Americans, yet it was the lack of being formally educated about Black history that piqued his curiosity. Wilson once stated that he was encouraged by the fact that in all his reading of history, seldom, if ever, was the Black experience in America given any weight. Seldom were they admitted to the larger playing field of cause and effect. As such, August Wilson sought then to simply restore that experience to a primary role, thereby giving the facts of history a different perspective and creating, in essence, a world in which Black America was the spiritual center. In doing so, Wilson goes on to say, quote, since I was not a historian but a writer of fiction, I saw as my task the invention of characters. Accordingly, Wilson laid claim to a past that is too often forgotten, thus filling the gaps of historical records by using his artistic license to mesh facts with a fictional imagination. The importance of Wilson's body of work is that it links Black folks to significant moments throughout the 20th century. For instance, his work connects us to an Africanist past through his visual references, whether they be rituals originally observed on slave plantations, I'm thinking about the Juba dance, or by invoking mystic phenomena such as Aunt Esther, a figure that hovers his cycle. Some of the connecting moments within Wilson works includes the critical tension between African spiritualism and Christianity, as we see in Joe Turner's Come and Gone. The Negro baseball leagues and African American trials with government employment, as we see in Fences. Gentrification in African American communities, as we see in Radio Golf, and the essence of Black life and culture through musical expression, as we see with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. In a 1984 interview with Kim Powers, Wilson states, "The importance of history to me is to simply find out who you are and where you've been." As such, Wilson has developed a narrative style wherein history and memory, to quote David Roman, drive each character, thus illustrating the powerful influence of the past upon the present. In placing history and culture on the stage, Wilson goes beyond recording history merely to inform. As Sandra G. Shannon notes, by transforming select moments in Black history into dramatic reenactments, he attempts to forge new attitudes among Black Americans about their past and the role they played in its making. Wilson's dramaturgy avoids simple historical summaries of Black history as well. As such, Wilson's aim was not to restage history, but rather to probe the significance of Black history across space and time, subsequently resuscitating lost and silenced narratives. Furthermore, Wilson's dramas do not explore history through the experiences of famous politicians or activists, but instead, Wilson opts to depict history through the lens of the ordinary people that has firsthand knowledge of the historical moment. In doing so, he reminds us that everyone, from historical leaders to everyday folk, are bound by history. August Wilson's body of work has not only identified particular moments within Black American history, yet even more emphatically, Wilson's dramaturgy has poignantly prepared us for one of Black America's greatest victories, the election of America's first Black president, Barack Obama. And although Wilson did not live to see this monumental moment, one can only wonder if Wilson foreshadowed what was to come in the 2008 election with the final play in his cycle, Radio Golf. August Wilson died October 2nd, 2005, of liver cancer. And yet, through his work, his legacy remains. It has been noted by a number of scholars and critics that Wilson is positioned within the global canon of literature, amongst the ranks of William Shakespeare, Anton Chekhov, Lorraine Hansberry, Arthur Miller, James Baldwin, William Faulkner, Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, and Toni Morrison. And he has opened the door for some of today's greatest dramatists, including Len Nottage, Dominique Morisseau, Katori Hall, and Terrell Alvin McCrane. With 2 Pulitzer Prizes, a Tony Award, several New York Drama Critics Circle Awards, and a host of other awards, accolades, and the first Black American to have a Broadway theater named in his honor, August Wilson is undoubtedly one of the world's most distinguished figures of arts and letters. As I come to a close, I want to recognize the person who formally introduced me to August Wilson, Professor Jan Ellis Scruggs. She was my professor at Cheyney University of Pennsylvania during my undergrad time. She introduced me and my classmates to Fences, which would later be my senior project, where I played the role of Corey Maxson, superbly directed by Professor Scruggs. I also want to recognize the scholars whose work I would go on to study in graduate school and now as a professor of theater. Scholars whose works I return to as inspiration for my work, and more emphatically, scholars whose research and writings are the foundation of August Wilson studies. Those names are Sandra G. Shannon, Kim Piera, Paul Carter Harrison, Harry Elam, Sandra Richards, Alan Nadell, Dana Williams, Ladrica Menson Furr, Keith Clark, Joan Harrington, Larry Glasgow, Kamika Williams Witherspoon, Mary Bogumil, Chris Rawson, and Marilyn Elkins. And I know there's many others out there. With that, I want to say thank you and happy birthday, August.
You're muted, Patrice.
I'm sorry. I just want folks to know that they can answer any questions in the chat for Dr. Long and Melonnie. And I'm actually going to the chat right now just to see what folks are saying. This is, I hope I get her name correct, Fasiha M. Teller. Yeah, Treller, I think, Treller. What is the significance and impact of Wilson's working class focus?
I'm muted as
Dr.
well.
Long? Okay.
That's a good question. I was going to, Melody, did you want to jump in on that one?
I am thinking about that. What is the impact on the working class focus? I'm reminded of an interview that he gave where he uh, was making kind of reference to the popularity of the Cosby Show, and just kind of he was comparing that that lifestyle and that class with, I guess, what you might consider working class or more blue collar, and just kind of just talking about a better representation. He also mentioned how he just did not feel that those displays, although they were motivating and inspiring and needed, very much needed, he did not feel like, and I'm looking for his quote where he was giving that interview, but he just, I remember him making commentary in interviews about how that may not have been the most representative. I'll see if I can find that quote, but Dr. Long, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, I think you touch on that, right? Like, you're looking at Wilson's body of work, his oeuvre, it is peopled with working class Black folk. And I think in many ways, first and foremost, it's important to acknowledge that that's the folk that is sort of the grain in which Wilson emerges, right? Thinking about his mother, thinking about his father, and in particular his stepfather, right? Thinking about the Black communities in which he writes about in his work, and even though his plays are centered in Pittsburgh, most of them, with the exception of Ma Rainey, thinking about the 10 play cycle, right? Wilson's works, I think, speaks to Black Americans throughout the country in response to, in response to, being enslaved, in response to, post the enslavement period, in response to Jim Crow South, in response to the Great Migration, where we began to travel up north into the West, into the Midwest. And I think in the significance then is that, that is Black working class folk are the grain of this country. Black working class folks are the folks who built this country. Black working class folks are the folks who continue to fight for this country, and fight for their rights in this country. And in statistically speaking, there's more working class Black folks remaining in this country than there are middle class Black folks, right?
So Dr. Williams Witherspoon, she says Ashe, and Dr. Menson Furr said wonderful presentations. Also, I know, Melanie, the interview that you're talking about, I think it was either, it may have been not 60 Minutes, but I think I do remember where he states that it's just the Cosby Show
Yeah.
wasn't a true representation of Black America.
Right. And I found it was a Bill Moyers
Bill
interview.
Moore, okay.
I thought, yeah, I remember that.
Mhm. And I just had to search for it real quick. But basically, he was just saying that he did not feel like it reflected Black America in his mind. He said, and Moyers countered with that and said that, they are Black Americans who have made it. They're successful. Their children are going to college. The mother is strong and smart. The father is professional. And so Wilson's response to that is that all the values in that household are strictly what I would call white American values.
Mm.
You can search the entire United States, and I think you would be hard pressed to find that family, despite the fact that there are some Blacks who have made it, who have money and who own their own houses, who are not on welfare, and who are educated and have jobs that have responsibility and respectability, I think is what he was trying to say. We do have Black doctors and Black lawyers, but his point was you would be hard pressed to find many of those families. And the implication that I took from it is that his writing, he was very intentional that his writing would be more reflective of working class Americans.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Cosby Show. I enjoyed the Cosby Show. I grew up on it. In many ways, I appreciated that the Cosby Show did not steer completely away from Black art and culture, right? There were these moments where folks would pop on, these guest artists and so forth, who are prominent figures in African-American history and culture, and also the references, things of that nature. So I thought it was a very progressive show. And in many ways, I think what, as Melanie is mentioning here, that the show then, according to August Wilson, perhaps is something to aspire to. But I think what makes August Wilson's work slightly different, or just different from what the Cosby Show was doing, is that August Wilson was attempting to uncover or recover Black American history, as opposed to simply look at what we should be, but he's looking at where we came from. And again, sort of the resilience and the resistance and the resource of, you know, the resourcefulness of Black folks in this country.
And he makes in my opinion, he makes a lot of commentary throughout the cycle where he is, you know, just kind of highlighting this idea of when you are trying to acquire those, you know, middle class values or the white American values, how much of yourself and your history, like you're saying, Dr. Long, do you lose in pursuit of that acquisition? So I think there's a lot of examples of that throughout, especially Radio Golf.
Right,
Mm.
right.
Great question, though.
Ladrica, she says, Melanie and Khalid, do you think that it's Wilson's focus on the folk? Oh, something just came up. I'm sorry, they popping up. Focus on the folk and Hurston does in her work.
Oh, as Zora Neale Hurston does?
Yeah, in Zora Neale Hurston in her work.
I think so. It's funny because I actually just wrote something on Zora Neale Hurston's dramas for this upcoming project. And so like I have been steeped in this. I have a book here. I'm at my desk and I have been steeped in this book here lately, the collected plays of Zora Neale Hurston, right? And so I'm reading a lot about Zora Neale Hurston's drama. Important, it was what I found really interesting. I didn't even know this much about her theatrical career outside of the plays that we are familiar with, including the plays and the plays that we're not familiar with, right? But the fact that she was a performer, she funded theater, she started a theater company, she was a director, you know, and so I got my work cut out for me. But returning to this question, I think so, right? I think that for me, I'm teaching American drama this semester here at Columbia College. And one of the things that I am teaching about is method, right? The ways in which playwrights enter the form, the you know, how they write, as opposed to just simply what they write. And that's a dramaturgical thing, right? You know, so Melanie, you know where I'm coming from, right? And we read Lynn Nottage's work a few weeks ago, I think last week, we read Sweat, and we talked about how Lynn Nottage employs to sort of giving a nod to this kind of ethnographic work, right? And in many ways, you know, she's not the first to do that. I think then, and for me, I connect Lynn Nottage, that ethnographic work back to August Wilson, and then ultimately back to Zora Neale Hurston. As we know, Zora Neale Hurston was an anthropologist, and in many ways, as I consider her to be one of the founding voices or sort of a pioneer of performance studies, and a groundbreaking figure within anthropology and even ethnography. So all that to say, in many ways, I think if we think about the ways in which Zora Neale Hurston was referring to the folk, right? The people, the down home people, and in particular for her, down in Florida, the people she lived amongst, worked amongst, you know, partied amongst, right? And ultimately that she would write about, the people who would people her plays. August Wilson, I think, is doing something very, very similar, in the sense that he is not simply creating characters that just pops out, you know, from his imagination, but he's peopling his plays with the very folk that he lived amongst, that he knew, that he worked with, that he grew up with, that inspired him, that taught him, and in some cases that traumatized him, right? Thinking about his father and all this, you know, so forth, right? And in many ways, thinking about his methodology, to some degree, one could argue that he employs a kind of ethnographic, slight nod to, you know, this ethnographic methodology, right? Living amongst the people, studying the people, and then ultimately, and observing them, participating in the rituals and so forth, and then including them within his dramatic works.
Thank you. Also from Kamika, she says, so much of Wilson's work is bound up in interrogations of African retentions and Black spirituality. He dances around commenting on African Americans' reliance on faith, but never comes down in support of one faith system over another. Which plays, in your estimation, unpacks Black spirituality the most? And what are your thoughts?
Mm.
The question.
Yes. I love Wilson's implications in Joe Turner's Come and Gone, and just how he just kind of how he addresses spirituality within the character of Loomis, of Harold Loomis, and him making that declaration, you know, that he can bleed for himself in the, you know, in that very famous scene. So that's the play that comes to mind for me about just unpacking spirituality, as well as their performance of the Juba dance and just all of that honoring of those rituals. So I don't know, that's the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think Jim of the Ocean probably for me. You know, in the moment where they, you know, travel the city of bones. I don't know, you know, it's a good question, but it's a hard one. Because I think spirituality it hovers its entire body of work. I think in some plays it's more pronounced, right? When you have these moments of sort of these African retained practices, Joe Turner's Coming and Gone, Jim in the Ocean, and so forth. And then the moments where it's, you know, clearly the sort of transition from African retained practices to you know, what morphed later into a direct nod to Black American Christianity. But I think it's there in all the plays. I mean, it's there in all the plays in many ways. But if I was to say, you know, most present, probably Jim in the Ocean, probably Joe Turner's Coming On. Yeah. But I also want to add, right, like, because we can't ignore, like, you know, his engagements with death, right, which is a spiritual practice. We can't ignore his engagements with birth, right, and some of the rebirthing moments as well, the cleansing moments as well. I'm even thinking about Troy in Fences, and his constant sort of entanglement with death, right? To some degree, a kind of acknowledging of death, but also a kind of, to some degree, a fear of death in many ways for Troy Maxson. Yeah.
I love how sometimes, specifically in Fences, we almost feel like death is an additional character in the story.
Right.
So just to kind of speak about, you know, those connections. So I always think that's very interesting whenever we encounter his plays where death becomes a character.
Right. I mean, even then, like, let's go to 1980s. King Hedley. You mentioned this earlier, Melanie, right? You know, you have King Hedley, 1980s. Think about Aunt Esther's death, but also her resurrection, right? I think it's King Hedley beginning to play. Aunt Esther's dead is the announcement.
Right.
And at the end of the play, she's, you know, the cat, right? The blood, the cat.
Yes.
And she's resurrected, right? All those moments. And I mean, you know, for people who are completely unaware of that kind of African retained practice, right? They're probably, what is this? What's happening here? But for those of us who are maybe not necessarily practitioners, but who are aware of it, you know, that is significant, right? Her resurrection, that is so significant. And then in the next play, we're back at the house. We're dealing with, right, the actual house, right? You know, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. That through line of redemption that, you know, he was trying to make throughout that whole play. And we see it at the end, you know, that it's fulfilled. The prophecy is fulfilled. And in that very next play, that's when Black Mary comes home. So I love it.
Right. May I ask a question? I'm asking Melanie a question too.
Sure, go ahead.
It's a question I often get, and I'm curious to know your answer. And that is, if August was still alive, what do you think he would be writing about today? And I'm not necessarily saying it'll be a continuation of the cycle, but what would his play? I actually think August would be like, I'm done with the cycle. Let me move on to some other projects. But what do you think he'd be writing about today?
Um, Gosh, I honestly think, although I agree that he probably would have laid the cycle to bed by then, but by now, I think he would still be urging us to return to our heritage and our roots, um, because that's where we find the redemption that we need. Um, so yeah, that's a good question. You're gonna make me think about that.
I also think about that because I think about that with a lot of playwrights who are no longer with us, who made their
Mhm,
transition. And like I think about Lorraine Hansberry, I've been teaching these folks lately, and I've been wondering what they would be teaching about today, particularly, in the context of African American history and culture, and where we also find ourselves today, right? All the things that we are dealing with that, we've been dealing with, right? But are so, I guess, um, centered, right? It's such a central focus we have of those issues today because they're, I think, just because all the stuff we're going through, right? Well, I don't have to, convince you all of that.
mhm.
And I often wonder what would they be writing about today? Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, you have me thinking about that for the rest of the day.
I know I remember seeing the interview where he talked about writing novels and how he wanted to get into writing novels. So
Mhm,
I'm wondering if he would just continue, not like I believe he would have left the cycle, but
mhm.
some form of writing, novels, but still continuing on with, like you stated, Melanie, how, not forgetting where we come back and,
Yeah,
remembering the past and not, assimilating, I guess, but in some form of, in a novel,
yeah.
whether it would be, I don't know, but I'm thinking maybe you got me thinking now, like
Right.
You
so.
you just made me think of one of my favorite novelists is Walter Mosley, and
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm often just kind of reminded of just uh, Mosley's very intentional, um, purposeful, writing for us, by us, Black us. And so when I think about Wilson kind of transitioning to novels, I think about, how great of a storyteller he would be in that sector as well. And it just kind of reminds me of what Mosley's doing now, with his detective series and things like that. But also, do you think he would also Wilson would also return to his poetry?
Mm.
It's funny. I was doing some reading the other day. I am, because of contract stuff, I can't talk about what this project is, but there's something coming up. And um I read something where he said, I really wasn't a great poet. I just love poetry. It was something in that realm, right? He was like, he's like, I acknowledge later, I really wasn't a great poet. Um, I don't like. I just think back on that comment. I don't know if he would have or not.
Okay.
But his writings were poetic, even in his
Yes.
critical essays,
Mhm.
right? Which we often don't give a lot of attention to. I don't mean us here on this call, but I mean in the general world of August Wilson studies, we don't often give a lot of attention to his interviews as well as his critical essays and his speeches, right? Which I think really sort of propels him to be this great activist and not simply a dramatist, right? But this activist who uses theater and the arts as a tool, right, for social change and calling out and so forth. Um, yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge that there, right? Like his critical writings, I Want a Black Director or The Ground on Which I Stand, that great debate and writing. There was another one I can't remember the name of it, right? But giving a nod to that, and the reason that I'm thinking about that is because Patrick Maley just published a book, August Wilson Blues. I can't remember the title of it. I wrote a review of the book, and one of the things I put in the review is that one of the gems of this book is that he returns to the essays
Mhm,
and the interviews. Where Wilson has done a lot of them,
mhm.
and it gives us so much more great depth to understand Wilson, the man, the playwright, the artist, the activist, and so forth. Yeah. And oh, go ahead, Melanie, jump in.
No, I was just going to say, you bring up a really great point about even just the need for more critical thinking and critical accountability today than ever. Like even this movement here recently, We See You White American Theater. I mean, just imagine August Wilson's voice in
Yes.
something like that. So I was just going to say, you bring up a great point about critical thought.
There was an essay recently, I think it was an American Theater or something. I feel like I read so much stuff sometimes, and I need to start like doing like a bibliography or something for myself, because I never can remember where these things come from, especially like the internet so fast and you just click, 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 click away. But I read something the other day that was published, I think in American Theater Magazine or something. And I was like happy because I've been saying this in like my circles of friends and colleagues or whatever. And I was like, well, you know, the We See You White American Theater Manifesto, or that call to action, great, beautiful, wonderful. I'm all in support of it, obviously. So, but I was like, you know, August Wilson's been calling for that for a while now, y'all, right? And using very much the same, if not a similar framework. But this article in American Theater Magazine was like, this is a return to the mid 1990s, where August Wilson was calling out theater institutions, you know, education institutions, and those who are supporting theater as funders and so forth, right? And so again, right, and I was glad that I saw the articles. I was like, August Wilson's been doing this, among others, right? There have been others doing this, but on this kind of national platform, it was August Wilson, you know, really leading that charge at the time.
That's good that they recognize that and acknowledge that. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I also wanted to mention, you know, and we were thinking about like what August will be doing. I think he would be a teacher. I think he would be perhaps, you know, teaching at a university somewhere, playwriting and so forth. I say that because I was recently looking at the work of Terrell Alvin McCraney. There's a new book that just was published, you know, on his works by David Roman, Isaiah Wooden, and I'm forgetting her name. She's anyway, she's gonna kill me for she's a dear person of mine. Okay. And you know, I read this I was reading some interviews that Terrell Alvin McCraney did earlier in his career. He was talking about serving as August Wilson's assistant one time when he was at Yale, when they were doing, it might have been Radio Golf when they were developing it at Yale Rep before his passing. And he said, you know, August Wilson was running me ragged, you know. He said there was this one moment that he says, you know, Terrell says, you know, I'm working on my own play as well that's getting premiered at Yale. But the professors had, you know, pulled me to be his assistant. And he says, I didn't even get a chance. People were saying, are you talking about your work? He said, no, I'm not, I don't have time. I'm running around for him, but I'm also, you know, working on my own works. And he said at one point, August Wilson was like, I need an iPod. I need you to give me an iPod. And he said, I'm running around looking for this iPod. And he said, I was so tired and I got back. And he said, I just like threw it at him. I was like, here you go. I'm out. I gotta go. And he said, do you know at one of McCraney's rehearsals, Wilson walks in with his people, with the cast of the other show, of Wilson's show. He's like, we're here to support you. And he goes, oh my God, August Wilson is here. Little did he know, August Wilson knew who he was, knew about his play. And he says, I got the iPod, for you. He says, your plays need some musicality to it. And start incorporating some musicality into your work. And I thought that was such an inspiring moment, right? To see how, you know, of course, folks are now calling McCraney the contemporary, the new, the today's August Wilson and so forth. And it's an honor, but also I think like, you know, something we got to be really, really careful about. And I just thought that was such a beautiful moment to see how this sort of moment of influence, mentorship.
Yeah, we were going to say the same thing. Mentorship, yes. That's awesome. That's I think you're totally right though. I could totally see him just elevating his work to that level of mentorship. And in instruction and education at that point in his career.
Yeah.
That's good stuff to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the stuff that I love to like read and immerse myself in, and part of it is also because like for students, I think like you and I are both teachers, and we know oftentimes you teach these playwrights, many of them who are now gone, sometimes our students, there's this sort of disconnect, right? That they're like, well, this person is dead to me. And there's a kind of like myth about them to some degree. When somebody dies, they become like this mythic figure that in many ways, did they ever really exist? Something I think about, right? In the context of death. But it's those kind of moments I like to share with the students, because then they go, oh, well, I know McCraney's work, like McCraney's really big here at Columbia College and at my school. A lot of professors, teachers work. And they go, oh, wow. So there's a sort of like a connection to Wilson through McCraney, who they can relate to, who also being here in Chicago, Steppenwolf, us being, demographically speaking, close, geographically speaking, actually, close to McCraney's work as a theater artist, Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I find that true with students. Also, you do have to find those connections to make the learning more meaningful for them. Otherwise, if they can't relate, it's hard to pull them in. And so, thankfully, August Wilson was such a prolific writer and artist that there are plenty of things to pull from to hopefully make those connections with students and make that learning more meaningful for them. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have like 7 more minutes left. And I just want to go real quick to the chat. So Kamika said generosity. I think that's in reference to your story about Wilson giving the iPod. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Rawson says, I'd love to address some of these issues when I get to join the program at 1. There's another detail about that McCraney story. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So also I really want to, because I'm thinking it is from both of you, some things that you were saying, the idea of like the organic intellectual, which when Wilson talks about, being in a rooming house and, the individuals, when he was staying at the boarding house, the people that were there, and him going into, these different, when he would go into the local places in the Hill District and sit in the stories that he would hear, and actually learning from these people, right? So when I think about, Wilson, I think about him as like this organic intellectual, a person for the people, giving back to the people, giving the stories that he giving them back, in the form of like this poetry and the blues and, all of that. And I just want to ask you both, because I don't think it'll be another Wilson. I don't see any playwright as another August Wilson. August Wilson was August Wilson. Right. Lorraine Hansberry was a Lorraine Hand, but I think people will come up in that tradition, and like, moving it on. So I guess my thoughts to you, like, what are some playwrights that you're reading right now, or that you may be teaching right now, that you may see, but not so much that, but that you see, let me go back, some playwrights that you see that are into the tradition of Wilson?
I can honestly say, just like you mentioned, that there is no one else who emphasized our oral tradition like Wilson, that is within my frame of reference. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Long may have more to share, but just going back to your point of him, being on the corners and in the diners, and considered the elders of his neighborhood to be tribal storytellers. Mm-hmm. He called them walking history books, and I love that. He said the people themselves who had gone through various experiences. And so I love his honoring of them as walking, talking history books. He said they congregated in the pool halls and the barbershops and the diners, and they discussed current events and previous events, and they debated on the world's, state of affairs and politics and religion and whatever was happening in the economy. And so I just feel like their conversation directly reflected the way that they viewed themselves in the world. And they use these spaces as opportunities to exchange ideas and lessons and encouragement. And we see that in the characters of his plays. And I can't think of anyone else. Can you, Dr. Long?
I mean, I think of playwrights, I should say, who are following in his tradition. And again, I want to give a nod to Patrick Maley, who most recently, I should say, not the only one, but most recently in his book, talked about Wilson as a forefather of contemporary playwrights, particularly contemporary African-American playwrights. He names Katori Hall as one of them, particularly because of how she writes. Most of her plays are situated within Memphis, Tennessee. And so thinking, and in doing so, similar to what August Wilson did, in doing so, putting a spotlight on an often under-discussed African-American community, but it's just as robust as any other place in America. I think about McCraney, Terrell Alvin McCraney in many ways. Dominique Morisseau is somebody I would call out because yes, it's funny because a lot of people, when Dominique Morisseau hit the scene, a lot of people said she's the next August Wilson, or she really reminds us of August Wilson. I interviewed her one time, and she goes, it's an honor for people to say that, because she goes, but it's not who I was directly influenced by. I'm honored, and yes, of course, he was someone whose works I was familiar with and studied, but she actually named other people, including like Pearl Clegg and Cheryl West, who were her direct influences. But I say that to say, I think that in thinking about those who follow in Wilson's tradition, I also want to acknowledge playwrights who I think are right alongside Wilson, doing something very similar. Pearl Clegg is one of them. To some degree, we can say Cheryl West. I also think about one of the people that my dissertation in my current book project was on, Glenda Dickerson, whose creative works were developed through the oral tradition, heavily so. A figure who in the 1960s was a major player in the Black theater scene in the Washington, D.C. area, particularly at Howard University. And most of her plays were developed through oral narratives and so forth. But I think, though, in thinking about Wilson's method as a playwright, I think there are many playwrights who divert from Wilson's methodology, but Wilson was one of the folks who was just simply unapologetically Black, and therefore opened the door for playwrights today to be unapologetically, radically revolutionaries who center Blackness.
I agree. Thank you so much. I appreciate both of y'all being a part of celebrating August Wilson. I know I've been following both of y'all, what y'all do in the theater. And I'm so thankful that y'all both were able to be here. And definitely, I'm learning from everybody. So, and I know our participants, I just wanted to check the chat real quick to see. Okay, so Ladrica says, thank you. Thank you. So I appreciate both of you. And I enjoy you. And I'm gonna be in touch, because I want to have y'all both come back, because it's something that y'all talked about that need to elaborate, and we just didn't have enough time. So I'm gonna be reaching out to both of you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Y'all.
All
right. Take care. So up next we have Mr. Rawson. Try to pull him up. I know he's here.
I'm here, but they say you've stopped my video.
I stopped your video.
Yeah,
Moment, let me see.
so I guess you have to unstop it.
Right. Okay. All right.
That's me. That is actually me.
All right. So I just
God,
want to introduce you.
It's a shock to look at yourself. There I am.
All right. So Christopher Rawson is the secretary and program chair at the August Wilson House. He is the senior theater critic at the Pittsburgh Post Gazette and KDKA TV. Rawson joined the English department at University of Pittsburgh in '68 and retired in 2018 after serving 50 years. He earned his BA at Harvard and his MA and Ph.D. at the University of Washington, with a specialty in early 18th century British lit. Early in his Pitt tenure, he served as director of the literature program and associate chair of the department. Rawson taught satire, Shakespeare, review writing, and August Wilson. So welcome, Mr. Rawson.
So will you call me Chris?
Welcome, Chris.
I'm going to certainly call you Patrice.
Yeah.
So many things have been said by Brian in the earlier hour, and then Melonnie and Khalid, that I wanted to respond to. I'll just pick out a couple of them now, but then I'm going to go into the routine that I'd planned, which is sort of talking about August's context in Pittsburgh, since that's where I'm talking from. This is Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is obviously so central to his life and his plays, and specifically the Hill District. I just wanted that issue that was just raised, what would he be doing today? August was desperate to finish the cycle. It became at the very end something of a burden to get the 10th play written, because there were a lot of demands on him from theaters, but also he had so many other things he wanted to write, and that was the issue that was raised. What would he be writing now? He had the start of several novels. He had pile like this, of course, of poetry that he'd been writing all his life. And he may have said he wasn't a poet, but I've read enough of them. I mean, nothing like that, but I've read, a little bit of them to know that he certainly was a poet. And I've talked to Constanza, his widow, about this, and she said, yes, we're working on that. So who knows what's happening. One of the things they need to do is get an editor to work with that and put out a collection of his poems. But he had also, as he was suddenly stricken and died at that horribly young age of 60, he was also working on other plays that were outside of the cycle. As I say, the cycle had been a bit of a burden at the end because he couldn't write other things. And he would, anybody who interviewed August knows this experience. You'd sit down with him and he'd light up a cigarette, and 2 packs of cigarettes later, you'd still be sitting there. And 2 hours would have gone by. I exaggerate slightly. And along the way, he would be telling you about the play he was working on next. He'd be telling you about some other story he wanted to write, a play that would fall outside the cycle. And by the way, I want to deal with that very quickly. You've been doing the proper thing, Patrice. You've been calling it the century cycle, the American century cycle. I want to confess that I was the one who first called it in print the Pittsburgh cycle. And I asked him about it once. I said, you see, I've been calling your plays. This was in the late 90s when I did it. So there were still several plays to go. And I said, you see, I've been calling this the Pittsburgh cycle. And he looked at me and he said, well, you're the Pittsburgh theater critic, so I guess you would, which I understood to mean that I had permission to call it that. It was only after he died that Constanza and the estate decided they would name it the Century Cycle. And actually, it was a year or two after that, they decided, no, we want to call it the American Century Cycle. And I have agreed with her that that's what I will call it. But I am still sort of fond in the back of my head of this name, the Pittsburgh Cycle. And actually, it gives me a little bit of pleasure when I Google Pittsburgh Cycle and American Century Cycle and how many million, hits does it get. Pittsburgh Cycle is sort of holding even with American Century Cycle and how people refer to it. But the estate definitely prefers the name that they came up with. So many insights that I heard along the way. The issue of Aunt Esther's age, I want to talk about. The whole issue raised earlier by Brian about Black actors losing touch with the cultural specificity of the plays. It's not just losing touch with the Black vernacular, but losing touch with the world out of which the plays come. And I had this interesting experience about, 10 years ago. Carnegie Mellon University, which you probably know is one of the leading theater schools in the country here in Pittsburgh. And they had brought in a Black director to direct, I think it was Seven Guitars. And she said to me, she involved me as a kind of a dramaturg, actually. And she got me, she said, these kids are so talented, but they don't know the cultural context of the plays. They mainly come from California or Florida or somewhere or other, and they're Black, but they're well-to-do. They're often children of biracial couples, and they just don't have any sense of the working class or sub-working class environment that the plays are set in. So she said, I've spent the first several weeks of rehearsal just talking about history. And so it's not enough to be Black. They have to be in touch with the world of the plays. And I've heard many of the older actors, the older Wilsonian actors, express that same worry. And I think Brian was alluding to that in his hour earlier on. Well, let me jump into what I had thought I was going to do. I usually start, when I'm talking about August Wilson, I usually start with a little bit of an origin story. How did I get to know him? And there's a reason for doing this. It's not to put myself in the center of the story, but I think it's important that I do this. I was an English professor at the University of Pittsburgh teaching 18th century and Shakespeare. But I also had been, as a college student and a little bit after college, I'd been an actor. I'd acted enough semi-professionally to learn that I wasn't going to make a career of it. So I got my Ph.D., as I say, and started teaching English. But I did a little acting on the side, and I started doing theater reviewing for some of the smaller weeklies in Pittsburgh, and for the PBS, NPR, the NPR radio station, and the arts editor at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which is the main paper in town, heard me on the radio and asked me if I'd like to become a theater critic for the paper. Whoever gets invited, to be a theater critic, usually people battle each other for the job. And I said, well, okay, I'll try it. And it started out as a part-time job because I was teaching at Pitt, but very quickly grew into a full-time job. So I cut back to half-time at Pitt because I didn't want to give that up, and became a full-time theater critic. And this was in 1983 that I started. And in 1984, a playwright named August Wilson, who we knew was a Pittsburgh native, even though he was living in St. Paul at that time, he had a play on Broadway called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So my editor said, well, you've got to go review that. So I went up to New York to review Ma Rainey. This is a couple of weeks after it had opened. And you know how the first act of Ma Rainey ends with that blood-curdling story that Levy tells about his mother being raped and his father taking revenge. I mean, it's just so powerful. So I remember stumbling out, it's intermission, and I'm stumbling out to the sidewalk to get a breath of fresh air, just overwhelmed by this experience. And someone said, to me, they said, you're from Pittsburgh, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, do you know August Wilson? I said, well, no. And they said, would you like to meet him? I said, well, of course. So they just pointed. There he was, smoking a cigarette, which is how August always was. He was always outside a theater smoking a cigarette. So I went over and I said, Mr. Wilson, my name's Chris Rawson. I'm a theater critic from Pittsburgh. And he went, whoa, a theater critic. So I went, whoa, a playwright. And we started talking. And of course, we talked about the Steelers. That's what two people from Pittsburgh do. And it became the start of a pretty good relationship, which eventually turned into friendship. I remember holding him at arm's length for some years because a theater critic isn't supposed to get too friendly with the people he's writing about, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point I thought, well, I'm crazy. Here I have a chance to be friends with one of the great men I'll ever meet. So I relaxed a little bit. I never thought of a theater critic's job actually as passing judgment on plays anyway. A theater critic's main job is to explicate plays, to try to help audiences come to the plays and understand the plays. So we became pretty good friends. I, interviewed him annually. I traveled to the premieres of the plays most of the time, and they were produced a lot in Pittsburgh, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point he said, why aren't you teaching a course in my plays? And I said, well, okay, there's several reasons. For one, I'm white. And he said, yes, we've noticed that. We've forgiven you for that. And then I said, in addition, I'm in the English department, and really the Africana Studies department should be doing it, or the theater department. And he said, yeah, but they're not, are they? I mean, he kept up. He knew what was going on in Pittsburgh. By that point, he was living in Seattle. But and I said, no, they're not. And he said, well, you ought to do it. And I said, okay, I will. I'll do it next year when you've completed the 10th play, which he was working on at that point. This was in November of '04. We had this conversation at the Edison Hotel, which is where he always stayed in New York, in the coffee shop there. And he said, that's great. You plan the course and I'll come to your course whenever you teach it. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to put it down for next year because Radio Golf, your play is going to premiere at Yale in the spring, and I know you're working on it a little bit after that to make it better. So I'll put the course down for next January. And of course, by that time he was dead. So the first time I taught that course, I couldn't get through the first class without crying. And it would happen to me now and then thereafter. And so why am I telling this story? I'm telling it because I have just this incredible privilege to have been the theater writer at the major paper in his home city. Incredible privilege of having gotten to know him as well as I did. I'm the one, for example, in Pittsburgh, he called to say he was dying. There were family members who knew, but I was the one outside the family. And I tell the story to excuse myself in a way for being a white person taking this role in the August Wilson story, because I understand what the problems that have come from white people trying to tell Black people's stories, appropriating Black people's stories. And I don't want to do that, but I think I was cast in this role. So it's really, when I talk about August Wilson, I want to start with some version of that story, usually shorter, to give me some kind of credibility in talking about him. My credibility with students, for example. Black students are looking at me like, who's this old white guy? Why is he talking about this great Black playwright? So I did get to follow him through the arc of his career. I hadn't known him when he was in Pittsburgh. He left when he was 33 in 1978. I could have gotten to know him, but I didn't even go to the Hill District. I live in Squirrel Hill, which is not far from the Hill District. In fact, if you're driving downtown directly from Squirrel Hill, you would go right through the Hill District to get downtown. But I was a typical white person who had been taught to drive around the Hill District because the Hill District was a site of revolution and decay. It was a, bustling, urban, multi-ethnic neighborhood when August was growing up, but it had been wiped out first by urban renewal and then by the riots of '68. So a community that had had 55,000 people in it when he was a boy had dropped down to about 10 or 12,000 by the time, by the '70s and '80s. And it's only started to come back, actually. So I didn't really get to know the Hill District until actually after August died, when I finally, it's funny, I mainly interviewed him in New York and elsewhere, because when he came to Pittsburgh, I would see him at the theater or something, but we would sit down elsewhere for interviews, because when he came to Pittsburgh, his time would be pretty well consumed by his family. They would come, they would besiege him. They would want a lot. In fact, twice, I think, I took Constanza out to dinner because he needed to be alone with his family. She didn't want to be part of that either. So she and I would go out to dinner while he was, he loved his family, but it was, of course, stressful, and he was the hero in the family. So there was a lot of pressure on him. So I would talk with him mainly elsewhere. So I never walked around the Hill District with August Wilson. There's also a million things I never asked him, because he was younger than me. It never occurred to me he would die before I would. Talk to your grandparents while they're alive, because you won't get the chance later. Talk to your parents. You never know. So when I'm teaching him, people will ask me questions that I ought to be able to answer. Because I do teach a lot about, as I say, the Pittsburgh context of the American century cycle and how that shows up in the plays, how the names, addresses, the sense of Pittsburgh in these different decades, how tangible it is in the plays. And people will ask me questions that I ought to be able to answer, and I have to confess, I never asked August that. I wondered that myself, and I just never did. However, I did get to follow the arc of his career, and I did get to know a lot about his earlier years, the first 33 years when he lived in Pittsburgh, before he moved to St. Paul, just as he was starting to become a playwright seriously. He had started writing plays in Pittsburgh, but only gradually. And then he moved to St. Paul in '68, and the first version of Jitney was written in '69. And actually staged for the first time 3 years later in 1982 by a small theater in Pittsburgh, which is when we first became aware of this playwright, August Wilson, who was by then living in St. Paul, as I say. He always, of course, was quite clear about, he had very mixed feelings about Pittsburgh. He told me once that, you know, when he's away, he wants to come back, and when he's here, he wants to leave. Because his experience, as you can tell from his interviews, or as you can tell from How I Learned What I Learned, his autobiographical play, as a young man, it was hand to mouth. Whether he was going to earn enough money to pay for his apartment rent, or and he, you know, he went from odd job to odd job, mowing lawns, working in restaurants, working in stock rooms of stores. And he was prickly, of course, who wouldn't be? And he didn't take insults gracefully, and he would quit and then have to find another job. Meanwhile, his mother was in despair. He worshiped his mother, Daisy Wilson. They took his last name from her when he remade his name. Oh, I guess everybody in the world doesn't know that. He was born Frederick August Kittel. His father was a immigrant from Germany, white, a talented baker, an alcoholic, and his mother was Daisy Wilson, a light-skinned Black woman from North Carolina who had come north as a young girl with her mother, whose name was Zonia. You may recognize that name from Joe Turner, of course. I mean, the characters in the plays, are so many of them are named for people he knew. It doesn't mean they're versions of the people he knew. It's just he used the names, as he did so many elements in the plays. So it was when he was 20 that he got his first typewriter. And the first thing, it's a famous story, everybody must know this. First thing he did was put a sheet of paper in his typewriter, and he knew he was going to be a writer, he was going to be a poet. So the first thing he did was type out his name to see how it was going to look on his manuscript that he was going to write. And he wrote out Frederick August Kittel, which was his name, named for his father. He had 3 older sisters, and he was the first boy. 2 more were to follow, but he was named for his father, Frederick August Kittel. His family called him Freddie all his life. But he began messing around with that, and Frederick August Kittel, and he worked his mother's name, Wilson, into it, and he ended up with August Wilson. And everyone always says, see, he took the Black name, Wilson, which is true, but he kept the white name, which is August. It's a blend of the two. He never wanted to talk about his father during his life. You see that again and again in interviews. People will say, tell us about your white father. And he said, well, my father, he'll say something like, my father was rarely around. And I grew up in the cultural environment of my mother, who was Black. I think Khalid recently said that he was assertively Black. No, he said he was unapologetically Black. And I would say he was assertively Black. He wanted to be Black. He chose to be Black. I mean, society makes that choice for you, of course, depending on skin color. But with August, it was also an ideological, emotional choice because he identified with his mother. However, my friend Larry Glasgow, who has been hard at work on a biography of August, focusing on the Pittsburgh years, the early years. Larry has evidence that August had more contact with his father when he was a boy than he ever wanted to talk about. So that's something we don't quite know about. And I think we can guess it from the plays, because one of the great reverberating themes in the plays is the difficulty of the father-son relationship, either from the point of view of the father or the son. I mean, if you think about it, it's central, obviously, to Fences. It's central to Jitney. I think it's really central in a way to King Hedley and Radio Golf. It even figures, this father-son thing figures in a way in Piano Lesson and 2 Trains Running. It's really important, and you can find the source of that to some extent. I'm not saying that biography explains imaginative literature. It's not that the biography ends up per se in the literature, but obviously it has an effect on the literature. So he thought he was a poet. He started out though, so he's living alone in the hill, and he became good friends. You know, find the story in his play, How I Learned What I Learned, how he made good friends who were in the arts. They were in the Black arts movement, which was part of the Black Power movement. And he, within a year or two, he was good friends with Rob Penny, a burgeoning playwright himself, a little bit older than August. And together, the two of them with a friend who now goes by the name of Salah Uddin, his name was House at the time, they started a theater company called the Black Horizon Theater. And August had a little bit of, they sat around, the way August told the story is that they sat around and Rob says, well, I'm going to write the plays. And Salah said, well, I'm going to act in the plays. And Salah actually is still a very talented actor, a professional actor. Although I joke with him, he went on to get into politics, and he was a power on city council. And I said, well, that is, of course, acting by another name. But he has continued to do some acting. And Jitney, August told him that the part of Becker in Jitney was written for Salah to play. And he did play it in that 1982 premiere production in Pittsburgh when he was just a boy, really, relatively speaking. But many years later, when he had grown to the age that Becker would be, he played the role again. And by that time, Salah had a child who had died in difficult circumstances. He'd had some of the experiences that Becker has. And I didn't see his performance in 1982, but I'm sure the performance 30 years later was that much richer for the life experience that he brought to it and the age. In any case, they started this group called the Black Horizon Theater. August dropped away after a couple of years, but it gave him a taste of theater, even though he still thought he was a poet. He was involved with Rob in another theater group called Ijames for a while. And then he made a good friend named Claude Purdy, who's an important person in the August Wilson story. And Claude was an actor. Claude actually played Becker for part of that run of the early production of Jitney himself. But Claude moved to St. Paul, and he said to August, you should come on up here. You can get work. You can get work in the theater. We'll turn those poems of yours about Black Bart. We'll turn it in. You can turn it into a play. August went to St. Paul and found out he liked it and decided to stay. And that's when he began to write about Pittsburgh. And he said this in interviews also, and described it to me in detail, that it was being away from Pittsburgh, where life was difficult on the Hill and life was day to day. Being away from Pittsburgh, he could listen and hear the voices that we've been talking about earlier in your show, Patrice, the voices from the jitney stations, from the diners, from the pool halls, which he'd been, without even thinking about, absorbing all these years. August had the most fabulous memory. I don't mean that I trust every story he tells to be accurate truth, but he had the most extraordinary memory, the things he would be able to pull up. And with my weak memory, when I could check him up on those things, it was extraordinary, the detail that he had. So all of that life in Pittsburgh, those first 38 years, those first 33 years in Pittsburgh was the fodder for the plays that he then started to write. It's interesting, of course, we all know that one of the plays is not set in Pittsburgh, and that's Ma Rainey, and that's the first one that was on Broadway. And I asked him when I got to know him after a couple of years well enough, I said, well, why didn't you set Ma Rainey in Pittsburgh? Why is it set in Chicago? And he said, well, you know, I'm from Pittsburgh. Yes. And he said, it was my first play on Broadway. Yeah. And he said, well, I just didn't think Pittsburgh was important enough, not important enough. So I looked for a big city in which to set the play. It could have been set in Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh actually had a very active Black recording industry back then, a really vibrant music scene. And actually, if you look at his second play on Broadway, which is Fences, you look at the program, it says I've forgotten exactly the phrase, but it says a northern industrial city. It doesn't identify it as set in Pittsburgh. However, every place name, every address, every detail in Fences is Pittsburgh, specifically Pittsburgh. So people now say, well, it's set in Pittsburgh, the Hill District. From then on, he said, the programs always said, the text always said Pittsburgh, the Hill District. It's an interesting thing to do, by the way. This is the kind of thing I do. I don't know if the more intellectual critics would do this. I've made lists of all the place names and the person names in all the plays, and how many of the person names are Pittsburgh people and how many of them are names from elsewhere. How many of the place names are Pittsburgh and how many of them are place names from the South or elsewhere. And it's really interesting that the overwhelmingly largest number of Pittsburgh names are Jitney and Two Trains Running, which are the two plays set in the Hill District during the years when August, as a young adult, was living in the Hill District. So they're the most Pittsburgh of the plays. Yeah, and you find different proportions in the other plays. Surprisingly, the piano lesson, which, I mean, obviously, Ma Rainey has no references to Pittsburgh. It actually only has one reference to Chicago. I think State Street is mentioned because August didn't know anything about Chicago, so he couldn't put anything in. And rest of the plays have varying amounts. Piano lesson is distinctive in that the largest number of place names in it are from the South, because of course everyone in it is recently from the South. So the play takes place in a sense in Mississippi, even though it's happening in Doker and Bernice's house in the Hill District. Let me, can you allow me to share the screen so I can show some pictures here? This will take me a moment. Now it's going to look like a mess here for a moment. Let me, here we go. Sorry, I'm not. So one of the reasons I was invited to be on this show is that I am a member of the board of August Wilson House, which is his childhood home, which we are resurrecting as an arts center for the Hill District. And August was always very clear on this. He said, if you're ever going to do anything with my house, he said, I don't want it to be a museum. I want it to be useful. And the construction that is now underway that we're carrying out is going to create what he wanted. That's his house. In the middle of the picture, this is a picture from the 30s. And the middle of the picture behind the truck is the front of a actually fairly large house. And the Kittle family, you had to go through that little tiny passageway to the right of the truck there to get to the back, where you found some steps going up to a 2-room apartment. Mother, father, and 6 children lived in a 2-room apartment with an outhouse in the back. By the time August was about 8, they'd gained 2 rooms on the floor above, so they were able to have a 4-room apartment for all 6 kids. But the interesting thing about the house is in the front, behind the truck, was a little mom and pop store called Bella's, which sounds Italian, but actually it's Hungarian, Bella. And it was run by the Siger family, Hungarian Jews. And directly to the left, which you cannot see, it's blocked, there was a little house owned by the Butera brothers, Italians, who one was a clock repairer and one was a cobbler. So the 2 houses together are a perfect paradigm of the Hill District as August Wilson grew up. There's a Jewish family, an Italian family in front, and a Black family in back. And in the 30s, the Hill District was roughly 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, those demographic groups, but it gradually, of course, became Blacker. I had to throw in a picture of Eddie's restaurant, the place where August spent so much of his young adult years, just sitting, nursing a cup of coffee, writing on napkins. They had a certain booth there where he and Sala and Rob would meet. It was sort of their office. Unfortunately, it was torn down all of a sudden one day when there were plans to save it as part of the August Wilson Hill District, but it was torn down unbeknownst, without any warning, is what I want to say. So here's August in 1999. By that time, the houses beside his house had been torn down. So we're looking on the left there, we're looking back toward what I described, where there were these stairs going up to the 2 rooms on the 2nd floor that was his childhood apartment. And here's what that childhood apartment had come to look like. Stairs going up, 2 rooms. And that's what we were faced with. It was a building that would have been torn down long ago if it hadn't been August Wilson's childhood home. Here's Bella's, looking straight on the left, and there's another view of what the apartment door had come to look like. And this is August actually in the backyard of 1621 Bedford Avenue. The house is at 1787, but several blocks down the street. This is the house that his mother was living in when she died, and he declared that this backyard is the site of King Hedley II, whereas the backyard of the house he grew up in is the site of 7 Guitars. Here he is out on the streets of the Hill on Center Avenue in front of the New Granada Theater with the Roosevelt Ballrooms upstairs. They both, all of these places show up in various ways in the plays, are referred to. This is one of the inside rooms of the 2-room apartment, which is, we are just starting restoration of now. The August Wilson house has been of course, a tourist site, even unrestored, even derelict. And here we are standing right in front of Bella's, in front of it. And people come from all over. They just want to put their hands on the bricks of August Wilson's birthplace. This particular group, that's Constanza, his widow. This is and Todd Kreidler behind her, and Eugene Lee and some others. This is only a few years ago, but before we'd actually started the reconstruction work. In fact, it is, of course, a landmarked house, and this is the landmark plaque in front of it. So that's where people usually gather to take pictures. This was a group from somewhere that I was dragooned into giving a tour of August Wilson's Hill District for, and there's a couple of more people posed out front. You see in this one on the right, restoration of the fabric of the building has started. That, by the way, that woman on the right is Cornelia Tencheva, who is the head of all the libraries at the University of Pittsburgh. And she is the one who recently carried out a negotiation with Constanza, August's widow, to purchase the August Wilson archive, 450 boxes. He never threw away a piece of paper. So they're early versions of scripts, all these things I was talking about earlier, unfinished plays, unfinished novels, piles of poetry. It's all now at the University of Pittsburgh Library being cataloged. And they say it's going to be a half year or a year before we get to look at it. But are we all licking our lips, of course, to see what August has left behind? That's a class from the University of Pittsburgh. When the house is restored, there will be seminar rooms, workshops, and so on. So people teaching classes in August Wilson at the different universities in the city will be able to come have occasional classes right in his house. Here you see construction underway. At this point, the Butera building, the little light yellow brick just to the left of the building there, still in existence. Unfortunately, it fell in before we could gain control of it. We being August Wilson House as an organization, before we could gain control of it and preserve it, because we were going to save it as I say, a paradigm of the Hill District. Jews and Italians in front and around back to the right, blacks in back. So you can see the extensive kind of brickwork repair needed. And we got to the point a few years ago when the brickwork was complete that we were able to put on a production of 7 guitars in the backyard of August Wilson's childhood home, which is the site that the play says, where the play says it takes place. It was a religious experience, let me tell you, seeing 7 guitars in that space, produced by Pittsburgh Playwrights Theater, with obviously the collaboration of August Wilson House. This is the curtain call of one of those performances. This is the Broadway production of 7 guitars, and I think you can see it. It's sort of that's the real place, and here's the set. Pretty close. Skipping over. So this is roughly what the building looks like now, with the outdoor, see to the right. It was originally 2 buildings, actually, and the one on the right, where the Kittle apartment was built in 1840, and the one to the left was built in 1880, and they were connected. But we call the whole thing August Wilson House. And just now, we're finally starting on the internal reconstruction. This is a drone shot of the kind of archaeological digging you have to do before, to see what you can find before you can start heavy duty construction. Here's that same drone shot looking from right above August Wilson House downtown, and you realize how close to downtown Pittsburgh the Hill District is. This is a picture from like last week, as the construction fence is up and work is starting on the inside. That's the most promising thing of all. It took us years to get to this point. And we got to this point primarily because Denzel Washington arrived with a gift of $5 million from him and his friends. He gave $1 million, Oprah gave $1 million, Tyler Perry gave $1 million, and some other names gave 50,000 or 100,000. He put together a package of $5 million, which is the bulk of what this project's going to cost. So as I say, the best thing in this picture, to my view, is that construction trailer on the left, because finally the construction indoors is actually starting. And this is what it's going to look like. Eventually, we're building on the left where the Butera building used to be. We're building what is in effect a service building, because you have to have elevators that can go up, that permit access to the upper floors of what is, after all, a very old 19th century house with small rooms inside. And this is what it will look like from the street on the other side. And this is actually a good version of what it's going to look like, with the fence around the back, around what will be an outdoor theater, a regular outdoor theater, because we'll be producing an August Wilson play every year and other kinds of plays as well. I threw these in here. That's August's first wife, Brenda Burton. You know, he had a wife for each of the 3 cities he lived in. I used to joke with him about that. Brenda, his first wife in Pittsburgh, was Black, and she's the mother of Sakina, August's adult daughter. That's, by the way, just my daughter in a picture. I finally met Brenda at the opening of Jitney on Broadway. Here's August on the left with Judy Oliver, who is his white wife in St. Paul. And here he is with Constanza, his Hispanic or Latinx wife, who he married and moved to Seattle. So as I say one wife for each city. And I joked with him once, I said, August, so your next wife will have to be Asian, and you'll be living in Honolulu because you're moving gradually westward. He laughed, but he said, no, I'm done. I found my wife. And here she is. Well, here August and Constanza are at the opening of the O'Reilly Theater in downtown Pittsburgh, which the new home of the Pittsburgh Public Theater, our main Lort Theater. And it opened with the world premiere of King Hedley II. Let me see, how am I doing for time? I haven't even been looking at it. I'm gonna show,
Got about
can I show a couple? What do you think, Patrice? Can I show a few more slides, or should I?
Yes.
Okay. This is a kind of reunion. Immediately to August left, that's Rob Penny, the playwright. These are the friends with whom he founded he was active in the Black arts, Black Power movement back in the 70s. And here they are many years later, enjoying their memories. His Marion McClinton, the director. You know, August really had 3 Broadway directors, Lloyd Richards, Marion McClinton, and Kenny Leon. Marion was a friend from his days in St. Paul. Well, here's Lloyd, who was, we all know, crucial to helping August, nurturing August as a playwright. August had the words, August had the soul of the plays, the stories, but he had to learn some things technically about playwriting, and Lloyd was his mentor there. I threw this in because why not? I got to give August, we're down at Kennedy Center, and I got to give him an award. This is back in the early 90s, an award from the American Theater Critics Association for the best play of the year. And this is when he gave a rabble-rousing speech at Pitt, a great speech at Pitt, attacking, it was the Pitt Honors Convocation, and he mainly spent the time attacking America for its policy in the Near East. And I came up to him afterwards and said, August, give me a copy of your speech. And he did. And then I took it down to the Post-Gazette, had to be edited down because it was too long, but I got it in print because I thought this is something we don't want to lose. Here he is at the Public Theater with the cast of King Hedley II. So that's the premiere cast, of course. It's not the one who went on to Broadway. In fact, the only member of that cast who survived casting to the Broadway production is Charles Brown, who's in the blue jeans on the right there, playing Elmore. Um, well, Marion McClinton on the right survived as the director, but the rest of them were all gone, replaced. I think that's Tony Todd, who played King, and Russell Andrews played Mr. Not to spend too much time. Just before he did King Hedley here, there was a revival of Fences at the Pittsburgh Public Theater. I mean, they'd done Fences before, but they did it again. And this is the set for Fences, which was still under construction. And from the left, it's Keith Glover, who was playing Lyons, I think, and Marion McClinton, the director, and August, and John Henry Redwood, who was playing Troy. And they are all playwrights. So I got the four of them together for a discussion of what it's like to be a Black playwright, or a playwright in general, and we taped it. It's a really interesting conversation. I wrote a newspaper article based on it, but of course only got some of it in. And Marriott said, you know, August's experience as a playwright is nothing like the rest of us. He said, I'll never forget this. He said, August Wilson is Michael Jackson at this table. But he said, since theaters are doing a production of an August Wilson play, these Lort theaters, these white theaters around the country, and it's attracting good audiences, the next year when they don't have one to do, they're looking around and saying, well, maybe there's another Black playwright. And some of the brave ones are even saying, maybe we can do 2 Black plays in our season. So obviously, as people have said earlier today, August Wilson helped open the theater up to some extent for Black playwrights and for Black actors. I think I'm going to end with this. This is a great evening. Mark Southers in the lower left was a steel worker who was mentored by August and became a playwright, and then founded a theater company called the Pittsburgh Playwrights Theater. And he also had a play reading thing at his household where friends would come and they would read an August Wilson play to each other. And one day, August called him up. He was in Pittsburgh. And he said, Mark, I understand you guys are reading one of my plays tonight. Can I come? And so August said, yes, you can come. And they were doing Jitney. And August read Turnbow. August was a great actor, by the way. So this is the group that was gathered at Mark Southers' house that night. And the guy in purple is Wally Jamal, one of the really great August Wilson actors, who's done not only all 10 of the cycle plays, but also How I Learned What I Learned. So he has the rare 11th. He's the only one in the country I know who's done those 11 plays. That happened in Pittsburgh too, of course, the funeral. And that's adjacent to Pittsburgh, in a suburb just north of Pittsburgh, where August is buried. I did not, until August had died, start to walk around the Hill District to figure out where the plays take place. No one else had done it either. And this is a map on the wall of the library in the Hill District, where we've plotted out 1 through 10, the locations of the plays as I've determined them. Now, some you can be precise about. 5 is 7 Guitars, and that's in the backyard of August's house. And 9 is King Hedley, and that's in the backyard of the house his mother died in. And number 2 is Joe Turner, and I can explain to you from the clues in the play why that's there. And number 1 is Aunt Esther's house at 1839 Wiley Avenue, so we can locate that precisely, but some of them we just have to take a guess on. And the other numbers are other places that were important in August's life. I think, oh, well, this is an example of the kind of stuff that of which there are boxes and boxes and boxes being unpacked right now at the University of Pittsburgh for the archive. This is the block party we have in front of August Wilson's house each year, although not obviously this year because of the pandemic. Okay, I'll end with this. This is a commercial. I do a twice a month, I do an interview program, about an hour and a quarter, with Wilsonian actors and directors, and you can see a list of the people I've talked to so far. They are both local actors like Wally and national actors like Stephen Henderson and Felicia Rashad. And then some of them are national actors who started out as Pittsburghers. Leland Gant is a Pittsburgher, Monte Russell is a Pittsburgher, Monte was the, they all have, you know, substantial August Wilson credits, and here they are. These are the people who've been on my interview show so far. Todd Kreidler, Felicia Rashad, J.W. Williams, Mark Southers, and Wally Jamal. Down on the lower right, Eileen Morris from the Ensemble Theater in Houston, Lee Gant, Ruben Santiago Hudson, and then Stephen Henderson and Monte Russell together. And that's Yvette Gagne. She was a great interview, peeking out from behind August. And there's Eugene Lee and Derek Sanders, who started out as a student at the University of Pittsburgh when he first met August, and then went on to found a theater in Chicago. I better stop. I've used up my time. Nobody gets to ask me a question. Unmute yourself, Patrice, so we can hear you.
Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the history you provided. One question I want to ask before you go: the transformation of the August Wilson House, how is that going to benefit the community? You touched on it a little bit, but and then also I want you to add on, so what's going on today at 5, or is it 4?
Yeah, it's actually
5.
at 4. No,
Is
it's
it
actually
4?
at 4.
Okay.
How is it going to benefit the community? We're determined that this is a way of giving back to the Hill. The Hill gave August so much. It nurtured him, and then it provided him with the material for this fabulous plays. And what has the Hill gotten out of it except for the wonderful feeling of, you know, we're famous. So this is an art center for the Hill. It's going to have classes. It's going to have workshops. We're hoping that the Hill, that it's going to be the kind of place where a group of people will sit around a table and plan a revolution the way they did back in the diners when August was a young man. You know, I mean, it's going to be a place open to the community. But we have all kinds of programs already underway. We have visiting fellows. We have, well, this Actors Talk August interview thing that I do. We have something called August in the Schools, which was supposed to have started this year. We've got a curriculum. It was supposed to have started this year, but got held up by the pandemic. So it's going to start in the fall. We have the productions in the backyard, the block party, August Wilson Reading Roundtable, showcase for actors, and the emphasis is always on the community. Some of it will be reaching out to the nation or to Pittsburgh at large. But of course, the Hill isn't the only Black community in Pittsburgh. There's also the North Side, there's Homewood. So, well, let me just tell you, for example, today, you asked about that. Today, in place of the block party this year, And next year, we hope to get back to the 6,000 people and 100 vendors block party that we had in 2019. But in place of the block party this year, we decided to hold a competition. We allowed people, artists, to nominate themselves. And we had a committee then that picked 10 of these artists. And we paid them each $1,000 to produce an artwork in honor of August and his legacy. And today at 4 o'clock, there's an exhibit of these 10 artworks down the street from August Wilson House. I mean, in 2 years, we'll be doing this in the house, but right now it's down the street from August Wilson House. There's a VIP preview at 4, and then the exhibit is open from 5 until 7. Meanwhile, up at the house, just up the street from 5 to 7, there will be a DJ and an MC doing interviews, and there will be information about the house, the process of the house, and also 300 free meals from food trucks. Well, with this, we're providing free food for people who like it, but we're also supporting Black vendors, these food trucks. So that, and we're assuming that the meals are going to be primarily for the community, because people can just walk over. We've heavily leafleted the community saying, come to August Wilson House between 5 and 7 on his birthday. But it's first come, first served. So we don't know whether 300 meals will be gone in a flash or whether we're going to have 150 of them left when the day is over. But we've got a home that we can take them to if there are some left at the end of the day. You know, I should show you.
I also have a question as well.
Yeah.
That was in the chat. And this is from Kamika from Temple University. She teaches in the School of Theater.
She's going to ask an intelligent question.
Well, she says, this was fascinating. Oftentimes, archaeological evidence is often found adjacent to unearthing outhouses. Why was the decision made not to recreate that space, even if just as a talking point?
So we know where the outhouse is, and they've recovered some things from it, which will be on display in the house. The outhouse is underneath the area that's going to be the where the backyard theater is. But it's interesting. The house has been landmarked, and then we want to work on it. How do you work on a landmarked house, particularly one built in 1840 and 1880? But it's been landmarked at its period of significance, which is when August Wilson lived there. So that's the 40s and 50s. So we are tasked with returning the house, the inside of the house, to what it was like then. We don't have to go back to the earlier century. If we were to to rebuild an outhouse, it would be right in the middle of that acting area. But we have, you know, often outhouses you find when you excavate them, you find what was thrown away as junk, but it's still interesting. And we have some early bottles and, you know, things of interest retrieved from that archaeological dig, which have been preserved. And of course, there's a chart now showing where everything was found. So that's available for scholars going forward. That's the best answer I can give to her question. I don't know, it's really unfair of me to go into what I want to do very quickly is, and this will be messy for a minute. Excuse me, what did I do here? So sorry. Oh, this is an award we give, by the way, to the theaters that have done the full cycle. There are 15 of them so far. This is a list of our programs. And this is the one, this is what I was looking for. So this is what we're doing today. 2 ways to celebrate: in person and live streaming. And there are in effect 2 events. There's the Art for August exhibit, and then up at the house, there's free food, and as it doesn't say, but a DJ and an MC who's going to be interviewing people. And the exhibit that is not just a one-day thing. We've got places around the city which are going to host this exhibit for the next year. So it'll be a month at Duquesne University, a month at a community center in Hazelwood, a month at the University of Pittsburgh, and so on. And then at this point next year, we'll have another competition and a new group of artists. And we own the art now. So the art, or some of it, will go on display in the house once that's available. So anybody who's interested in this, starting at 4 o'clock, you want to go to www.augustwilsonbirthdaycelebration.com down at the bottom, and you'll find a link to the, it's on Facebook, actually. It's on the August Wilson House page on Facebook, where the all of this is going to live stream from 4 o'clock till 7 o'clock. Best time to go on would probably be at 4:30, when we're going to present some awards, and the University of Pittsburgh Library is going to make an exciting announcement of how they've added something important to the August Wilson archive. So I've taken more than my share of time. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. We do want folks to hang around here till 5.
Yeah.
They
Don't.
can join you guys at 5 o'clock, because I'm definitely going to be joining you all at 5.
Well, who knows what you'll see, but you'll probably be able to go back and see something that was on before that.
Now, let me ask you, on your Facebook, on the Facebook page, folks will be able to go and live
You
stream
should.
there, or go directly to Zoom? How we'll be able to watch it virtually?
So as you can tell from my age, some of my generation can't even navigate Facebook. And part of the problem is there are Facebook pages that sound like August Wilson House, which lead you astray. You know, we bought most of the domain names, but we didn't get them all. Mm-hmm. So what I've been telling my friends is go to www.augustwilsonbirthdaycelebration.com. And there's a nice clear link to where this thing is going to be live on Facebook. Also at the top of that page, there's actually, this will take a second. Whoops, wrong one. I'm sorry. I need to go to, if you go to, this is augustwilsonbirthdaycelebration.com. This is what you'll see. You go to here. Nobody can miss that link, right? Mm-hmm. That's not, but also up at the top here, if you click on August Art for August, you'll come to some really nice little short 2 or 3 minute. These are the artists who we commissioned for $1,000 each, and they run a range from real novices to fairly sophisticated artists, from young to old, male, female, as you can see, I think, from the pictures. And we thought of this as a way to, reach out to the community, nurture the community. These are all Pittsburgh artists. There's also a nice, that's past block party. So anyway, my point is that this August Wilson Birthday Celebration.com is a good basic place to start. So that's the other. That's the other advertisement, along with my Actors Talk August. I call it Actors Talk August, but the one that I'm interviewing next Monday is David Gallo, who is August's set designer for his last 5 Broadway plays. He has interesting stories to tell. Everybody has had good stories to tell. I mean, so far, everybody I've interviewed are people who've actually worked with August. But of course, in the long run, I'm interested in talking to people like Brian, who have this, rich history of doing August Wilson plays and have a lot of insight into the plays. But I'm racing around getting people who knew August, because you never know, well, A, when I'm going to die, or when one of them's going to die.
Right.
So trying to get this stuff down, recorded for the archives. I haven't asked Denzel or Viola yet, but I think eventually they'll probably come on. Denzel will, because he's sort of the patron of August Wilson House. He said the next time he would be in Pittsburgh is when we have the grand opening, which will be in just about a year.
Oh, wow. I'm looking forward to it. So that was great. I'm definitely, when it's open, I would love to bring, a trip, do a trip, the August Wilson Consortium, do a trip and come to visit the home, and, maybe during a block party or something. But I would love, I definitely want to make it back there, but I want to make it the trip when the house is done. That way.
Right. Well, what you really want to do probably is we think it's going to have at least a soft opening next spring.
Okay.
And by next summer, then, when there should be a production of an August Wilson play in the backyard, that would be the time to come. And when you do come, Patrice, you get in touch with me, because I'm the one to give you a tour of August Wilson Hill. I haven't, I think you've seen this, haven't you, this book, which is by Larry Glasgow and me. I, as the sort of historian of August Wilson, and Larry at that time was the historian of the Hill District. And together we produced this book, which is, well, it's a tour. I mean, it's one of these things with a fold-out map and you can walk around the Hill District. But I also got to write an introduction to August's life and career, and Larry got to write an introductory history of the Hill District. So I always tell people this little book is actually a nice introduction to August Wilson in general.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate you coming on. I know you have a lot going on today as well with the celebration that y'all doing. So thank you for taking time out to participate with celebrating August Wilson.
Actually, you know what you did, Patrice? You gave me an excuse, so I don't have to be down there helping to set up the exhibit.
I think I remember you putting that in the email.
Yeah, what I do have to do is be down there by 4 o'clock to help greet people at the VIP preview.
Right.
So I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to stay on and listen to what you have coming.
That's fine.
Because
I definitely understand.
I have enjoyed this. I have enjoyed this whole thing, and I really thank you for letting me be part of it.
I appreciate you accepting the invitation.
Thanks.
And yeah, we were able to go over a little bit because I have an hour gap of time. So I'm glad we.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So
good.
But I'll see you at 5.
You may not see me, but
I'm not going to see you. But
who knows? We don't know. I mean, fingers crossed, because this is. We're a small organization, August Wilson House, and we're putting on an art exhibit. We're putting on a street party to which we don't really want people to come because we don't want to be a spreader event. I mean, it's kind of weird. We're going to have people lining people up to get the meals in a responsible way.
Right.
And then we're trying to do the online version of this at the same time. And it's not like we have a lot of paid staff,
Right.
So we'll see how it goes. You understand, you're a consortium,
I definitely understand.
Yeah.
So Ladrica says, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Ladrica.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So that was great talking with Chris. We have a little break right now, but what I'm going to do is between that time before Ladrica comes on at 3 p.m., I'm going to play a video of August Wilson. Actually, he's in conversation, but it's really good. And it's the first opportunity or the first, I would say, interview where I seen him in a different light. He seemed a little bit more relaxed. I guess because it was youth that was in the audience. It was just something different about that interview that I really enjoyed. And I think it had a lot to do with the audience, that it was youth that was in the audience. But I got a lot of information that I didn't know prior to seeing this interview, and I think you guys may enjoy it. So if you want to stick around and watch this this interview, and join me back at 3, and I'll have Dr. Ladrica Menson Furr come on from 3 to 4. So I'll see you guys at 3. Thank you.